Chapter 1625. Just like what Chu Mu had expected, the Great Elder was no match for Chu Mu. The Great Elder was defeated after barely resisting for less than a quarter of an hour. However, the Great Elder's gains weren't small. This struggle of less than a quarter of an hour was better than half a year's worth of bitter training. His control over his own strength had deepened. However, it was still not enough. He still needed to put in more effort before he could completely control the power of a 7-star martial saint and fully unleash it. Sect leader, I have lost. The Great Elder walked to Chu Mu and said apologetically. Although Chu Mu had said it before, he still felt bad about losing. It's okay, Chu Mu said. Sect leader Chu, we have 1 win and 1 loss now. The Great Elder of Star Sword Sect laughed. It was as if the mountain that was pressing on him had disappeared. He felt relaxed and comfortable. Now only the 2 of us are left. The leaders of the Wang Sword Sect and Wang Sword Sect were also relieved of a heavy burden and smiled joyfully. They were going to win. 2 wins out of 3. The Great Elder of Star Sword Sect could definitely defeat Chu Mu. Chu Mu would definitely not be a match for the Great Elder of Star Sword Sect. Sect leader Chu, we are the ones who have come to your sect with requests. I am very sorry about that. The Great Elder of Star Sword Sect looked at Chu Mu and said apologetically. So, I will let Sect leader Chu make the first move. I promise that I will not fight back within 3 moves. The Great Elder of Star Sword Sect said. Xia Zhenkong and the Great Elder showed disdain. You have once again refreshed the definition of shamelessness. Chu Mu looked at the Great Elder and said seriously. The Great Elder of Star Sword Sect's expression changed, but he did not say anything. 3 moves, right? Take this. Chu Mu said and waved his finger. Suddenly, a sword light shot out. The sword light was condensed and it was enough to kill a 5-star saint. The difference between a 5-star saint and a 7-star saint was too great. Hence, Chu Mu's move was completely useless against his opponent. For the second move, Chu Mu agreed not to use his sword. Instead, he pointed out his sword finger. The extremely condensed sword light turned into a point of starlight and shot out. It was faster and more powerful, but it still couldn't do anything to his opponent. Sect Master Chu, you only have 1 last chance left. The Star Sword Sect's Great Elder casually dodged Chu Mu's 2 attacks and said, pretending to be a good person. Then take this. The third move. As soon as Chu Mu's voice fell, his eyes flashed with a sharp light. The eyes of O Yangming's primordial spirit in his spiritual world also emitted bright lights. The soul-cracking wheel, which he had refined to level 4, instantly shot out. Although the soul-cracking wheel was a manifestation of the power of the primordial spirit, it couldn't be seen with the naked eye. Only the power of the soul could sense it. The moment the soul-cracking wheel shot out, the Star Sword Sect's Great Elder suddenly felt a chill in his primordial spirit. However, the distance between them was only a few dozen meters. To the soul-cracking wheel, this distance was far too close. He only felt the chill, but before he could react, the soul-cracking wheel had already shot into his spiritual world. The Star Sword Sect's Great Elder immediately reacted. He knew that O Yangming had used a primordial spirit attack. Those who practiced primordial spirit attack secret techniques weren't necessarily practitioners of the way of the primordial spirit. Those who were qualified to be called practitioners of the way of the primordial spirit all had stronger souls and stronger primordial spirits than others. For example, some saint experts with normal power of souls and ordinary primordial spirits could practice primordial spirit secret techniques as long as they met the conditions. For example, very few people knew that the Star Sword Sect's Great Elder had actually practiced a primordial spirit secret technique as well. It was a defensive primordial spirit secret technique. Although it was only a level 2 defensive primordial spirit secret technique, it allowed his level 4 primordial spirit to have a defensive ability that others didn't have. The Star Sword Sect's Great Elder was surprised at first, but then he relaxed. This was because he felt that Yangming was only a beginner 2-star saint. No matter how powerful his primordial spirit was, it would probably only be a level 2. Even if he was a practitioner of the way of the primordial spirit, it would at most be a level 3 primordial spirit attack secret technique. A level 3 primordial spirit attack secret technique driven by a level 3 primordial spirit wouldn't be able to harm a level 4 primordial spirit with a level 2 defensive primordial spirit at all. However, before he could be proud of himself, his face became extremely ugly. This was because he could already feel that the primordial spirit attack that had entered his spiritual world wasn't a level 2 or level 3 primordial spirit attack. It was a level 4 primordial spirit attack. Outside of the Star Sword Sect's Great Elder's bronze primordial spirit, there was a layer of green light that enveloped his entire primordial spirit. It was a level 2 defensive primordial spirit secret technique. A level 2 defensive primordial spirit secret technique couldn't withstand a level 4 soul wheel at all. In that instant, it was like a piece of paper being torn apart by a sharp blade, heading straight for the primordial spirit. The light of the bronze primordial spirit was activated and formed the final layer of defense. It firmly resisted the soul wheel's attack. However, the soul wheel spun at high speed and constantly cut, gradually cutting through the light of the bronze primordial spirit. In the outside world, the Star Sword Sect's Great Elder's forehead was covered in cold sweat. It flowed down like a stream. His face was pale and filled with panic. Chu Mu didn't plan on killing him, so he only used the soul wheel to cut through the light of the Star Sword Sect's Great Elder's bronze primordial spirit defense. It stopped when it approached his primordial spirit. Lose or die, you choose one. Chu Mu opened his mouth and spoke in an extremely calm tone. I admit defeat. The Star Sword Sect's Great Elder hurriedly said. He knew that as long as Lin Fan willed it, the terrifying black wheel would cut his primordial spirit open. Once his primordial spirit was cut open, it would be a dead end. He didn't want to die. At least, he didn't want to be killed in such a situation. That would undoubtedly be very frustrating. Hearing the Star Sword Sect's Great Elder's words, the Wang Sword Sect and Wang Sword Sect's sect leaders were both stunned. It was as if their brains had turned stiff and they couldn't react. Lost? Lost just like that? Impossible, this is completely impossible. The other party is merely a 2-star early-stage martial saint. How could he possibly defeat a 7-star early-stage martial saint? In that instant, the Wang Sword Sect and Wang Sword Sect's sect leaders even suspected that the Star Sword Sect had colluded with the Real Sword Sect and deliberately set up a trap for them to jump into. However, the two of them were very clear that they didn't. From the beginning, it was the 3 sects who had teamed up to attack the Real Sword Sect. Now, they had gone for wool and come home shorn. In that instant, the two of them felt darkness before their eyes. I didn't expect you to be a primordial spirit cultivator. The Star Sword Sect's Great Elder's face was still pale, and his voice was extremely dry. When the Wang Sword Sect and Wang Sword Sect's sect leaders heard that, they were instantly shocked. They knew very well what it meant to be a primordial spirit cultivator. Then, they thought that since Lin Fan could make the Star Sword Sect's Great Elder admit defeat, didn't that mean that his primordial spirit had at least reached the 4th level? Oh my god, a 2-star beginner saint's primordial spirit had reached the 4th level. What was going on? Xia Zhenkong and the True Sword Sect's Great Elder were also very shocked when they heard the Star Sword Sect's Great Elder's words. At the same time, after thinking about it, they couldn't hide the shock on their faces. 3 battles, 2 out of 3. You all have made a sword oath. I don't think you'll go back on your words, Chu Mu said with a smile. When Chu Mu found out about the 3 sects' intentions, he started to think. After sorting out his thoughts, he buried a plan. Of course, this plan wasn't 100% feasible, but the probability of success was at least 70%. As for the 30% probability of failure, it wasn't that Chu Mu and the others had lost, but that the other sects weren't willing to accept such a battle. Chu Mu was confident in the true sword sect, and obviously the other three sects were also very confident in themselves. The clash between confidence and confidence was decided just like that. The three of them were all gloomy. That feeling was the gloominess of having their hopes dashed. They felt that everything had become meaningless. If they lost, it meant that they had lost 3 sections. Were they going to deny it? They had made a sword oath. Once they went back on their words, the consequences would be severe. Sect Leader Chu, I need to return to the sect first and report this matter to the sect leader. The Star Sword Sect's Great Elder said. What about the 2 sect leaders? Chu Mu looked at the Wang Sword Sect's sect leaders and asked. We have to make a trip back too. The 2 sect leaders said. All right, then I'll have to trouble the Great Elder and Guest Elder Xia to go with the 3 of you. Chu Mu said to the Great Elder and Xia Zhenkong. Although the 3 of them weren't too happy about it, they didn't object. They had already lost. According to the oath, the 3 sects would become branches of the True Sword sect from now on. In other words, they were vassals. Chu Mu had the True Sword sect's Great Elder and Xia Zhenkong's foreign minister go with him for a reason. It was to supervise and prevent any more changes. Furthermore, he was preparing to accept the surrender of the 3 great sections. If it was only the Great Elder going alone, Chu Mu wouldn't be at ease because the Great Elder was only at the beginning stage of the 7-star saint rank. His strength wasn't strong enough. However, with Xia Zhenkong it was different. He was an absolute existence that could kill an 8-star saint rank. Yes, sect leader. The Great Elder bowed. While he sighed in his heart, he was also overjoyed. The True Sword sect was really going to develop. It was in the hands of the sect leader. With 3 more sects as branches, the True Sword sect's strength would increase greatly. They would jump from the bottom of the second-rate forces to the middle of the upper-tier forces. Of course, the branches wouldn't truly submit. But the Great Elder believed that with the sect leader's methods, he would definitely be able to integrate the 3 sects into the True Sword sect and strengthen the True Sword sect. Next, the Great Elder and Xia Zhenkong left the True Sword sect with the 3 of them and headed to the Cloud region. Chapter 1626. It was a simple battle, but it held extraordinary significance. At the very least, the Royal Sword sect, Sword Gazing sect, and Star Sword sect would become vassals and branches of the True Sword sect. It was equivalent to the True Sword sect increasing in strength. Chu Mu gathered the elders and had them discuss how best to use the 3 sects to strengthen the True Sword sect. Right now, the True Sword sect belonged to the main sect, while the 3 sects belonged to the branches. The resources of the branches should be tilted towards the main sect. Although the elders were not powerful enough to be of much use against the powerful enemies of the sect, they were all experienced in dealing with the affairs of the sect. They shared some of Chu Mu's burdens with him, so he did not have to think too much and had more time to cultivate. The outside world still did not know the outcome of this battle. Unknowingly, the True Sword sect had become even more powerful. It would take close to a month to travel from the True Sword sect to the 3 sects of the Cloud region, and a round trip would take close to 2 months. Including the time it would take for the Grand Elder and Xia Zhenkong to take over the 3 sects, it would probably take even longer. He would just wait here for the good news and hope that nothing untoward happened. Otherwise, the 3 sects would all be destroyed. Perhaps they really were disciples of the True God Sword sect that had survived, but whether they had truly survived on a mission or had escaped before the battle was unknown. Although Chu Mu had obtained the legacy of the Sword Universe and the Forest of 10,000 Swords, strictly speaking, he was a successor and not a disciple. Even if he was a disciple, he was a generation removed from the sect masters of the 3 sections. There was no friendship between them at all. What Chu Mu needed to do was develop the True Sword sect as quickly as possible while its foundation was stable and complete senior by Ling's instructions. 3 soul-splitting wheels hovered around his early Class 4 soul spirit, slowly revolving around it. One of the soul-splitting wheels had a deeper color and looked more textured. Its edges were thinner and sharper. It was the only early-stage Class 4 soul-splitting wheel in the collection. The other two wheels were only at the peak of Class 3. It was even harder to cultivate the fourth level of the wheel of soul rending. Back then, Chu Mu had spent a few years of time in the 100-Year Secret Book to successfully refine the soul-splitting wheel from the second rank to the peak of the third rank. To completely refine the soul-splitting wheel from the peak of the third rank to the beginning of the fourth rank, the amount of time needed wouldn't be any less than before. Finally, he still had to split the soul-splitting wheel, which would take even more time. Chu Mu cultivated continuously, and with the help of the moonlight, he increased the refining efficiency by at least 30%. It took him 2 months to refine one of the soul-cracking wheels from the peak of level 3 to the early stage of level 4. Now, Chu Mu planned to refine the other two peak rank 3 soul-splitting wheels to rank 4. At that time, as long as the opponent had a level 4 soul spirit, as long as they did not cultivate a level 4 soul spirit defense secret technique, they would not be able to survive under his 3 soul-splitting wheels. Of course, if it was possible, Chu Mu would continue to refine it. Once he reached the peak of the 4th rank, he would split one of the splitting soul wheels and continue to refine it. However, that would require even more time because he couldn't refine it all the time. Only when there was moonlight would the effects be better. In the Boundary Monument Hall of the Profound Yang Sword Hall, 2 figures were flying quickly, crossing each other time and time again. One sword light was bright, while the other sword light was obscure. The bright sword light had a variety of styles. Sometimes it was rapid, like a storm, sometimes it was violent, like a thunderbolt flame, sometimes it was gentle, like a breeze falling leaves, and sometimes it was continuous, like a gurgling stream. The obscure sword light only had one style, and that was strange and changeable. The obscure sword light was like a ribbon that twined around the sword, creating a viscous force that caused the space under the sword to form a unique force. It was a force that was filled with a viscous force that clearly hindered the other party's movements. And under that endless sticky force, the obscure sword light was like a poisonous snake waiting for an opportunity to move. It carried an astonishing killing intent, and every sword could be fatal. The 2 figures fell into an extremely intense battle, but both sides did not use much strength. They only used a little of the same level of strength to display their respective sword technique. The bright sword light gradually strengthened and became more and more mysterious. The obscure sword light, which was originally somewhat rough, was also constantly perfected. The 2 sides fought fiercely for another half an hour before stopping and separating. One of them was Chu Mu, and the other was a heavenly puppet, the heavenly puppet that Chu Mu named Chu Tsongfeng. The illusory heavenly puppet Chu Tsongfeng, under the 18 illusory crystals and Deshang's spiritual wisdom, had finally derived its own cultivation method and sword technique after a considerable period of time. The newly derived techniques and sword techniques were rather rough, so Chu Mu would fight with Chu Tsongfeng to hone Chu Tsongfeng's techniques and sword technique. This would allow Chu Tsongfeng's techniques and sword techniques to be perfected quickly, and allow Chu Tsongfeng to quickly grasp its own strength. Once Chu Tsongfeng completely mastered its own strength and perfected its cultivation method and sword technique to a certain extent, it would become a true 7-star saint expert. At that time, the true high-end strength would be further enhanced. The more powerful the high-end strength was, the more stable the sect would be. Naturally, it would also attract more geniuses to join and strengthen the ranks of the disciples. The other 2 heavenly puppets were just beginning to develop spiritual wisdom, and it would take a long time for them to become complete. They also lacked the corresponding energy crystals to activate and transform into their own strength, so they were not useful for the time being. Every day, in addition to cultivation, Chu Mu would fight with Chu Tsongfeng. As Chu Tsongfeng's sword technique was perfected, it was more effective than Chu Mu's solo cultivation of sword technique. Moreover, Chu Mu would also choose a few sword techniques related to the power of illusion from the sword techniques that he had comprehended in the Forest of Thousand Sword Steels, and teach them to Chu Songfeng to enrich his knowledge of sword techniques, and also to help improve his own sword technique. Under continuous improvement, Chu Songfeng also derived movement techniques and footwork, which were closely related to the power of illusion. In the blink of an eye, a month had passed. A guest came to the True Sword sect, a guest that Chu Mu did not expect. In the main hall of the sect, True Sword Marquis, I said that we would meet again. In the main hall of the sect, the visitor squeezed out a smile and said to Chu Mu. However, this person rarely smiled, so the smile he squeezed out looked a little stiff. This person was Huyen Jingting, who had fought with Chu Mu before. Chu Mu would never have thought that Huyen Jingting would come to the True Sword sect to look for him. "Young lord, you are here as an honored guest," Chu Mu said. "I will arrange for an elder to accompany you." Chu Mu thought that Huyen Jingting had come to the True Sword sect to travel, and he could not personally accompany Huyen Jingting, so he said this. "Sect Master Chu." Huyen Jingting changed the way he addressed Chu Mu. "I am not here to play, but to join the True Sword sect and become a member of the True Sword sect." Hearing Huyen Jingting's words, Chu Mu was stunned. Could it be that there are some conditions to join the True Sword sect? Huyen Jingting asked again. He was very direct. "Sect Master, please tell me. I will definitely do it." His resolute tone revealed his determination to join the True Sword sect. "With your talent, you are naturally qualified to become a member of the True Sword sect," Chu Mu said. Huyen Jingting's fervent tone and sincere expression showed that he really wanted to become a member of the True Sword sect from the bottom of his heart. Huyen Jingting was a 4-star early-stage saint, but he was also an eternal monstrous genius. His powerful strength allowed him to kill ordinary 6-star early-stage saints. Perhaps Huyen Jingting's current strength was not enough for him to move unhindered, but he already had the qualifications to do so. One day, when he reached the 7-star saint level, his strength would definitely be comparable to a peak 8-star saint. Then, I will be a disciple of the True Sword sect from now on? Huyen Jingting's tone was filled with excitement. Huyen Jingting had long known that the True Sword sect was a sword cultivation sect. However, he was not moved at all because as far as he knew, the True Sword sect was not strong enough to attract him. However, after meeting Chu Mu, the sect master of the True Sword sect, he personally fought with Chu Mu. Not only was he unable to defeat Chu Mu, but he was also defeated by Chu Mu. Chu Mu even pointed out the shortcomings of his sword skills. Huyen Jingting was grateful, but also shocked because Chu Mu's cultivation was far inferior to his. The main reason was that he wanted to join the True Sword sect. From today onwards, you are a member of the True Sword sect. However, the disciples of the True Sword sect are only below the saint level. Those who are at the saint level can either become elders or make other arrangements, Chu Mu said. "First, open up a cave on the sect master's peak." "Yes, sect master." Huyen Jingting very well integrated into his role. Chu Mu summoned an elder and explained Huyen Jingting's identity and joining the True Sword sect to the elder. Then, he asked the elder to bring Huyen Jingting down to open up his own cave. As for the Profound Yang Sword token to enter the Profound Yang Sword realm, Chu Mu would not give it to him yet. If a sect had enough geniuses, their future would be limitless. Of course, the more geniuses there were, the more resources they would need to consume. After all, the resources a genius needed to cultivate were not something an ordinary cultivator could compare to. Currently, in the True Sword sect, Chu Mu was the most powerful genius. He was an eternal level monster and one of the most outstanding among the monsters. Now, there was an additional Huyen Jingting, who was also an eternal level monster. Although he was a normal level monster, it would still raise the level of the True Sword sect's geniuses. Furthermore, Chu Mu had always been considering the future True Sword sect. he would not always be the sect master. He would always need someone trustworthy and capable to be the sect master. Huyen Zhengting seemed to be a candidate. Chapter 16:27. Huyen Zhengting walked out of the place where the true sword sect kept their cultivation techniques and sword technique. His mind was filled with the sword techniques that he had seen. The sword techniques that had been collected were only the less precious parts of the true sword sect. They couldn't be considered to be very profound. Only a few of them had reached the heaven level. Even if they were placed outside, they would still have an extraordinary value. However, to Huyen Zhengting, such a sword technique was nothing. The sword technique that he had cultivated was clearly superior. Therefore, after flipping through them, Huyen Zhengting could not help but feel a little disappointed. On second thought, perhaps the true inheritance of the true sword sect was not placed there. After all, the defensive power there was not strong enough. In other words, the true sword sect had other places to collect profound books. Although Huyen Zhengting really wanted to take a look, he also understood that he had just joined the true sword sect and did not have the qualifications to do so. He could only calm his heart and cultivate while truly integrating into the true sword sect and becoming a part of it. In any case, he did not have any abnormal thoughts when he joined the true sword sect. It was very simple. He just wanted to pursue a higher level of the sword Tao. That was all. Huyen Zhengting's whereabouts would often reach Chu Mu's ears. It seems that he is really sincere in joining the true sword sect, Chu Mu thought. Chu Mu could see that Huyen Zhengting was a person who was obsessed with the sword Tao. However, he was from the Tsang Lan royal family and was a young prince. His status was not inferior to Chu Mu's. If he wanted to join the true sword sect, it would inevitably arouse Chu Mu's suspicion. Now that he had observed for a period of time, it seemed that the other party did not have any special purpose. Of course, it was still not enough time to make a definite judgment. However, he could make a preliminary estimate. Even so, Chu Mu did not plan to let Huyen Zhengting obtain the Profound Yang Sword token and know of the existence of the Profound Yang Sword realm. The current true sword sect was not strong enough. Every day, he cultivated sword energy, comprehended the sword heaven and earth, and fought with Chu Tsangfeng's sword technique. When there was moonlight, he cultivated Yuan's spirit secret technique. Days passed like this. There were no fights. He could feel his cultivation base and strength improving bit by bit. Sometimes, Huyen Zhengting would come looking for Chu Mu to ask for guidance. Naturally, Chu Mu would not hesitate to fight him at the peak of the sect master's peak. Now, Huyen Zhengting was a part of the true sword sect. Although Chu Mu couldn't think of a way to define Huyen Zhengting's position, that didn't stop Chu Mu from giving him pointers. A 2-star early-stage martial saint giving pointers to a 4-star early-stage martial saint might sound funny, but it was the truth. In terms of swordsmanship, Huyen Zhengting was clearly inferior to Chu Mu. After receiving Chu Mu's guidance, Huyen Zhengting's 2 self-created sword techniques had been further perfected, and their might had also increased. A month and a half had passed since Huyen Zhengting arrived at the true sword sect. The great elder and Xia Zhenkong had just returned to the sect. However, when they left, there were only the 2 of them and 6 martial saints from the 3 sections. There were a total of 8 martial saints, but when they returned, there were only 6. Chu Mu didn't find it strange that the 3 leaders of the 3 sects had come. After all, it wasn't a small matter for the 3 sects to be subordinates of the true sword sect. For the 3 sects and the true sword sect, it was a huge matter. Naturally, they had to treat it with care. However, the first envoy of the Battle King sect had left after Chu Mu had let him go. Why would he come to the true sword sect now? Moreover, why would he come with the great elder and the others? Chu Mu glanced at him. His face was pale, his eyes were dim, and his aura was chaotic. He knew that he was injured, and very seriously. Patriarch Chu, our great elder lost. Our star sword sect admits defeat. said the leader of the Star Sword sect to Chu Mu. He was a mid-level 7 martial saint. He was even stronger than the Great Elder. But as the leader of the Star Sword sect, I created the Star Sword sect. I don't want the Star Sword sect to become a branch of the True Sword sect. Do you want to break your sword oath? Asked Chu Mu indifferently. No, I won't break my Great Elder's sword oath. I heard from the Great Elder that Patriarch Chu is a cultivator of the primordial spirit Tao, said the leader of the Star Sword sect. His eyes were shining like stars. Patriarch Chu, please use your primordial spirit Tao to attack me. It was a strange request. Everyone didn't understand. They frowned and looked at the leader of the Star Sword sect. Even the leaders of the King Sword sect and Gazing Sword sect had the same expression. What do you mean? Asked Chu Mu. I don't want to accept this. So I need a reason that I can accept, said the leader of the Star Sword sect. His words were easy to understand. He had created the Star Sword sect and put in a lot of effort. But now, he had to become a branch of someone else. It was normal for him to be unwilling. But what did he mean? Without thinking too much, Chu Mu used the soul-splitting wheel. The soul-splitting wheel, which had completely stabilized at the early stage of the 4th level, shot into the leader of the Star Sword sect's spiritual world and went straight for his primordial spirit. The leader of the Star Sword sect's primordial spirit was also a 4th level primordial spirit. However, the luster around his primordial spirit was darker than that of the Great Elder of the Star Sword sect. It was close to bronze. It could barely be considered a mid-stage 4th level primordial spirit. What was worth Chu Mu's attention was that outside the leader of the Star Sword sect's primordial spirit, other than the bronze primordial spirit light, there was also a blue luster. The blue luster was like ripples in the sea, but it was fixed in one place and didn't leave. This was a primordial spirit defense secret technique. The blue luster, which was like the sea, protected the leader of the Star Sword sect's primordial spirit. The early stage of the 4th level soul-splitting wheel instantly shot toward the leader's primordial spirit. It was extremely fast. In an instant, it entered the sky above the blue luster. The blue luster fluctuated and surged upward like a huge wave, rushing toward the soul-splitting wheel. The soul-splitting wheel's cutting power was only slightly hindered. It broke through the heavy blue waves and continued forward. Level 3 Primordial Spirit Defense Secret Technique. In an instant, Chu Mu determined the level of the opponent's Primordial Spirit Defense Secret Technique. However, a Level 3 Primordial Spirit Defense Secret Technique couldn't withstand the attack of the early stage of the 4th level soul-splitting wheel, especially when it was cutting at high speed. Soon, the soul-splitting wheel broke through the opponent's Level 3 Primordial Spirit Defense Secret Technique and went straight for the Primordial Spirit. It was blocked by the Bronze Primordial Spirit's light. The defensive power of the Bronze Primordial Spirit's light was even stronger than a Level 3 Primordial Spirit Defense Secret Technique. It instantly blocked Chu Mu's soul-splitting wheel. However, it was only temporary. Under the constant cutting of the soul-splitting wheel, the Bronze Primordial Spirit's light was quickly cut open. In just 2 breaths' time, the soul-splitting wheel arrived in front of the defenseless Primordial Spirit. Traces of coldness invaded, causing the leader's Primordial Spirit to tremble. Chu Mu stopped the soul-splitting wheel and didn't cut open the leader's Primordial Spirit. Then, the soul-splitting wheel quickly retreated and left the leader's spiritual world. It returned to Chu Mu's spiritual world. Sect leader Chu is indeed a primordial spirit cultivator. The leader of the Star Sword sect had a strange expression on his face. There was excitement and loneliness. The Star Sword sect is willing to become a branch of the True Sword sect. The leader of the Star Sword sect didn't quite understand his attitude. In fact, other than himself, no one else could understand how he felt. However, since the leader of the Star Sword sect had expressed his attitude, he probably wouldn't go back on his word. Hearing the leader of the Star Sword sect's words, The leaders of the King Sword sect and the Wang Sword sect knew that the situation was set. There was no turning back. Although they didn't want to, they could only accept the fact. They would look for an opportunity to leave later. All right, since that's the case, I'll first invite the 3 sect masters to the side palace to rest. After the sect elders discuss this, we'll discuss the next step. Chumu said. He didn't delay or hide anything, directly speaking. The 3 leaders didn't object. They were led to the side hall to rest. Then, Chumu looked at the former first envoy of the Battle King sect. Sect leader, I met him on the way back with guest Xia. He was badly injured, so I saved him. The great elder explained. At that time, he didn't know that this person was the first envoy of the Battle King sect. At that time, the great elder was in seclusion and had never seen this person. When he found out later, he regretted saving this person and was about to kill him, but this person said that he wanted to see sect leader Chu. Firstly, he was badly injured, and secondly, Xia Zhenkong was there. The elder thought about it and agreed to his request. Sect leader Chu, thank you for not killing me that day. The first envoy of the Battle King sect bowed to Chu Mu to show his respect, but the Battle King sect has a huge background. Battle King sect was wiped out and I was still alive. That wasn't allowed, so I was hunted down. Hearing the other party's words, Chu Mu understood. Battle King sect belonged to the Imperial dynasty, and all the envoys came from there. Battle King sect was wiped out and he was the only one left. He was seen as a traitor and was hunted down. Although the Imperial dynasty had nurtured him, he had completed many missions for the Imperial dynasty. After being hunted down, he cut all ties with the Imperial dynasty. Fortunately, he met the elder this time. Otherwise, he would have most probably died from his injuries. Then, you can heal up in the sect, Chumu said. He didn't mention the matter of him staying to join the True Sword sect. He had already mentioned it once and was rejected. If he mentioned it now, it would seem like he was trying to force him to repay him. Sect leader Chu, can the True Sword sect take me in? The former first envoy of the Battle King sect hesitated. He thought about something and added, but if the Imperial dynasty finds out, it will be really bad for the True Sword sect. Normally, when one heard his second sentence, it would be normal to reject him. However, Chumu wouldn't refuse. When True Sword sect destroyed Battle King Gate, they were already at odds with Imperial Court. They were stopped by Kanglan Empire, so it wasn't a big deal for True Sword sect to take in another person being hunted down by Imperial Court. Chapter 1628. The bright moon hung high in the sky, illuminating everything. White veils covered the mountains and the earth. Chumu did not cultivate the moon-hanging moon secret technique. Instead, he was pondering. The leader of the Star Sword sect had just left. His conversation with Chumu allowed Chumu to have a deeper understanding of him. According to the leader of the Star Sword sect, the leaders of the King Sword sect and Wang Sword sect were both core disciples of the True God Sword sect. When the True God Sword sect was destroyed, the two of them were indeed out on missions. As for himself, he did not go out on missions. Instead, he was chased away by his master to leave behind the legacy of the True God Sword sect. Compared to the leaders of the King Sword sect and Wang Sword sect, the leader of the Star Sword sect had more burdens. He was also more eager to restore the True God Sword sect. However, when he started, he realized that it was very difficult. After working hard for more than 1,000 years, the current Star Sword sect was still very far away from the True God Sword sect of the past. One must know that when the True God Sword sect was at its peak, there was a Saint Emperor. Even the True God Sword sect of the past had several peerless experts. There were nearly 100 high-level Saint experts, thousands of mid-level Saint experts, and countless low-level Saint experts. The current Star Sword sect only had 2 7-star Saint experts at most. It was very tiring. At every moment, he wanted to develop the Star Sword sect and strengthen it. He wanted to restore the glory of the True God Sword sect as much as possible. However, it was very difficult. It was almost impossible. One could imagine the torment and pressure in his heart. The leaders of the King Sword sect and Wang Sword sect had the same thoughts. Therefore, the three sects formed an alliance with the Star Sword sect as the leader to gain a foothold in the Cloud region. This time, when they learned of the existence of the True God Sword sect, they did everything they could to obtain the True God Sword sect. It was also to strengthen their strength. However, they did not expect that they would not succeed. Instead, they would lose their lives. The leader of the Star Sword sect came personally. He was indeed unwilling. However, after confirming that Chu Mu was indeed a cultivator of the primordial spirit Tao, he gradually let go of his unwillingness. As long as they could develop better and restore the glory of the True God Sword sect, he could accept it. From the looks of it, the True Sword sect seemed more likely. Chu Mu couldn't help but sigh. After bearing the pressure for thousands of years, now that the pressure was gone, he could finally relax. As for himself, he estimated that he would have to continue working hard for a while. At this moment, another person arrived at the peak. Sect Master. The newcomer saluted with 3 swords. "Do you have a name?" Chu Mu asked. The person who came was the top envoy of Battle King sect. But Battle King sect was wiped out and he cut ties with the Imperial dynasty. Now, he was part of True Sword sect, so he had to have a name. "Sect Master, I didn't have a name before, but I've given myself one. My surname is Jian, and I've been practicing the sword my entire life. My name is Jian Quangxing," he said. "Jian Quangxing, all right, you'll be called Jian Quangxing," Chu Mu said with a smile. He flicked his finger and sent out 2 streams of wood avatar origin energy into Jian Quangxing's body. Instantly, the wood avatar origin energy spread out and healed Jian Quangxing. Jian Quangxing's injuries were extremely heavy. If it weren't for the Great Elder's kindness, he wouldn't have been able to hold on for long and would have died. When he came to True Sword sect, his injuries were still very heavy. He was completely relying on his own will to hold on. After that, he took some pills to heal his injuries and stabilized a little. Now that he had received 2 streams of wood avatar origin energy from Chu Mu, he felt his injuries being healed rapidly. However, his injuries were too heavy, enough to kill a 7-star saint. If it weren't for his many years of practicing the sword and his strong will, he wouldn't have been able to hold on. Hence, the 2 streams of wood avatar origin energy didn't heal him completely. Instead, he felt much better. At the very least, his injuries were reduced from fatal to ordinary injuries. This was equivalent to pulling someone back from the brink of death. Chu Mu flicked out 2 more streams of wood avatar origin energy. After they were used up, Jian Quangxing's injuries were reduced by a lot. He felt much more relaxed. "Go and have a good rest. Let your injuries heal," Chu Mu said. "Thank you, Sect Master." Jian Quangxing was sincerely convinced. The next day, the upper echelons of True Sword sect and the 3 sect masters gathered in the main hall to discuss important matters. With True Sword sect as the main sect and the 3 sects as the branches, the development strategy was decided. The 3 sects would copy the 3 great sword manuals and place them in True Sword sect. In addition, they would also select suitable disciples to cultivate in True Sword sect. True Sword sect would also send some disciples to the 3 sects for exchanges. This was the initial development strategy. As time passed, it would gradually deepen. In the end, the 3 sects would be fully integrated into True Sword sect. The reason why the 3 sects weren't directly integrated into True Sword sect was that firstly, it was too hasty and difficult to handle. After all, there were a lot of disciples. Secondly, True Sword sect's mountain gate wasn't big enough. After discussing the development strategy, Chu Mu announced another matter. That was to establish a True Sword sect guard team. This team would be used to protect True Sword sect's safety and be in charge of external expeditions. The members would all be at the Saint rank. This team will be called the Soaring Heaven Sword Cavalry. They have the ambition to soar to the sky. Chumu said. Jian Quangxing will be temporarily the commander of the Soaring Heaven Sword Cavalry. Merlin, Huyen Jingting will be the Soaring Heaven Sword Cavalry. Long Yi Wenfei, the two of you have reached the limit of 3-star saints and can break through to 4-star saints. After you succeed, you will also be part of the Soaring Heaven Sword Cavalry. Chu Mu announced, in the future, if any disciple breaks through to the immemorial realm, the outstanding ones will be part of the Soaring Heaven Sword Cavalry as quasi-guards. The mediocre ones will be part of the sect's deacons. With this decision, all the saint-level powerhouses in the True Sword sect, apart from the elders, were assigned a position. Royal Sword Sect, Gazing Sword Sect, and Star Sword Sect will each select 2 6-star saints to join the Soaring Heaven Sword Cavalry as Sword Cavalry Guards. Chumu said. Yes, sect leader. The sect leaders of the 3 sects all agreed. Then, Chumu appointed another person. Yang Zhen was a 3rd-level deacon of the True Sword sect. Yun Feng and Yun He were temporarily appointed as elders by Chumu after breaking through to the immemorial realm. However, strictly speaking, with their talent and so on, they were not qualified to be elders. Therefore, they were appointed as deacons. However, they were only 2nd-level deacons, which was higher than 3rd-level deacons. This was because of their contributions to the True Sword sect. If they could one day break through and become mid-level saints, they would be able to join the sect's elder group. The original 7 supreme elders of the True Sword sect were the current 7 elders. Among them, the 5th, 6th, and 7th elders were 3-star saints and 2-star saints respectively. Although their cultivation had increased due to the mysterious Sun Sword world and the primordial spirit cultivation secret technique, and they had all made breakthroughs, it was only small breakthroughs. Therefore, they were also appointed as deacons of the sect. However, because of their contributions to the True Sword sect, the 3 of them were appointed as 1st-level deacons of the sect. The original 2nd elder was promoted to the 1st elder, the 3rd elder was promoted to the 2nd elder, and the 4th elder was promoted to the 3rd elder. As for the original 1st elder, he became the 1st grand elder of the sect because he had a breakthrough in his cultivation and became a high-level saint. Perhaps being demoted from elder to deacon would make people feel uncomfortable, but all the elders agreed. Chumu had not made this decision on his own. Before this, he had already discussed the position of the upper echelons of the True Sword sect with the elders. Nothing could be accomplished without rules. Only by establishing strict rules and strictly enforcing them would a sect be able to guarantee its longevity after it became strong and prosperous. Otherwise, without rules, no matter how powerful a sect was, it would fall apart and eventually perish. It had to be said that although the elders were not strong enough, they valued the development of the True Sword sect more than their own lives. A mere position was nothing. With such elders and such talents, there was no need to worry about the True Sword sect's prosperity. The 3 sect masters left and returned to their respective sections. They told the elders of the day's decision and carried out further discussions. Then, they chose the elders and disciples to come to the True Sword sect to take up a position and cultivate. Within the True Sword sect, the newly appointed upper echelons were also announced and further improved. Chumu entered the profound Yang Sword world and moved a portion of the golden-crowned python condor race out of the profound Yang Sword world and into the True Sword sect. The remaining portion was left behind to continue the bloodline of the golden-crowned python condor race and continue to reproduce. As soon as it appeared, the golden-crowned python condor king released a powerful aura and soared into the sky. Countless amounts of heaven and earth yuan qi surged and gathered. Like a whirlpool, it spun at high speed and poured into its body. Its aura rose steadily and soared into the sky again. There were countless thunderbolts in the sky, but they were all defeated by the tyrannical golden light. It broke through. The golden-crowned python condor king broke through from the peak of the 6-star saint realm to the early 7-star saint realm. Moreover, its aura was still strong, and it only stopped when it reached the middle 7-star saint realm. The golden-crowned python condor king and the other ancient spiritual beasts had grown up in the profound Yang sword world since they were young. They were restricted, and the highest level they could reach was the peak of the 6-star saint realm. They were not like the great elder, who could break through inside. However, the profound Yang sword world could only withstand a breakthrough from the 6-star saint realm to the 7-star saint realm. The breakthrough from the 7-star saint realm to the 8-star saint realm would cause damage to the profound Yang sword world. After all, the profound Yang sword world was not strong enough. The golden-crowned python condor race was restricted, especially the golden-crowned python condor king. Its accumulation was incomparably deep. As soon as it came out, it broke through and reached the middle 7-star saint realm. Immediately, dozens of other 6-star saint realm, 5-star saint realm, and 4-star saint realm golden-crowned python condors also broke through. At least 1 to 2 levels, they became stronger. The disciples of the true sword sect stared blankly at the golden figure hovering in the sky, emitting a powerful aura. They were shocked beyond words. The golden-crowned python condor king became Jian Quangxing's sword mount. Merlin and Huyen Zhengting both chose a 6-star saint realm golden-crowned python condor king as their sword mount. As for Long Yi and Wen Fei, they were in seclusion in the profound Yang sword world, beginning to break through to the 4th layer of the Ionic realm. They could only choose their own sword mounts after they broke through. The disciples all knew that the newly created Soaring Cloud sword mount in the sect was a combination of themselves and the golden-crowned python condor king. It was even stronger, and this motivated the disciples even more. Chapter 16:29. Mountains that were hundreds of meters high and thousands of meters high were shrouded in a layer of white mist. Inhaling the white mist would make an ordinary person feel refreshed and live longer. It was the yuan qi of heaven and earth that had been gathered by the energy-gathering array. In the white mist-like yuan qi of heaven and earth, there were palaces and caves on the mountain peak. On the true sword peak, ancient sword peak, and other peaks, the disciples practiced their swordsmanship day and night. They fought, sharpened themselves, and strengthened themselves. Sharp screeches tore through the sky like arrows, causing the disciples to tremble. It was as if they had been stimulated, and their spirits were 100 times higher. Unknowingly, numerous figures had appeared in the sky, shining with golden light. Under the sunlight, they were extremely dazzling. These golden figures exuded an enormous ancient aura. They were the golden-crowned python eagles. Chu Mu had brought out more than 50 golden-crowned python eagles from the Black Sun sword world. Among them, more than a dozen were 6-star saints, more than 20 were 5-star saints, and the rest were 4-star saints. Every golden-crowned python eagle had at least broken through a small level and become stronger. Every golden-crowned python eagle had been nourished by the yang qi for many years. Their bodies contained extremely rich yang qi, and their blood was pure yang blood. In short, every golden-crowned python eagle had a pure yang saint body. If he could gain the approval of a golden-crowned python condor, he would be able to cultivate with it and improve with it. Then, he would be influenced by the pure yang aura of the golden-crowned python condor, which would greatly benefit his cultivation. Now, 5 of the golden-crowned python eagles had owners. Wen Fei and Long Yi had broken through one after another, becoming 4-star saints and joining the Soaring Heaven Sword Cavalry. So far, there were a total of 5 people in the Soaring Heaven Sword Cavalry. Jian Quangxing, a 7-star peak saint, was the commander. Under his command were Merlin, a 5-star peak saint, Huyen Zhengting, Wen Fei, and Long Yi, 3 4-star beginner saints. Among the 5 of them, Jian Quangxing was the strongest. He was at the peak of the 7-star saint level, but he was able to fight against an 8-star saint level beginner. He was almost on par with an 8-star saint level intermediate. Among the 4 swordsmen, Huyen Zhengting was the strongest. Although his cultivation base was lower than Merlin's, Merlin was ranked third. When Fei and Long Yi were on par with each other, if they cooperated with the golden-crowned python eagle, they would be able to display even more powerful strength. It wasn't as simple as 1 + 1, but 3, 4, or even 5 times stronger. One day, when the Ling Shao sword cavalry became strong, they would be the protection of the true sword sect. They would be invincible against foreign enemies. Although that day was still far away, people could already see hope. I must become a soaring firmament sword knight. Countless disciples secretly swore as they looked at the figures of the golden-crowned python condors. That represented a kind of honor, a symbol of strength. Especially after experiencing the battle between the true sword sect and the warlord sect, they couldn't do anything. They could only watch and be protected. That feeling of powerlessness was almost suffocating. The road to greatness was right in front of them. As long as they worked hard, as long as they fought hard, they could also become strong. They could also fight for the true sword sect and do their part for the prosperity of the true sword sect. After a few months, people from the 3 sects came again. This time, there were dozens of people. 3 7-star saint-level elders would be stationed in the true sword sect and set up a sound transmission magic circle. When there was an important matter, it would be activated to communicate with the 3 sections. Of course, it would consume a lot of energy to activate the sound transmission magic circle once. Therefore, it would only be turned off if there was no urgent matter. In addition to the 3 stationed elders, there were 6 other 7-star saints, 2 from each sect, who joined the Ling Shao sword cavalry. They also chose suitable golden-crowned python condors to become swordsman cavalry and guard the true sword sect together. In this way, the Ling Shao sword cavalry of the true sword sect suddenly changed from 1 commander and 4 guards to 1 commander and 10 guards. Their strength increased greatly. In addition, each sect selected 10 outstanding Nirvana realm disciples to follow them to the true sword sect to cultivate. In total, there were 39 people from the 3 sections. The 9 7-star saints were neither servile nor overbearing, but they were respectful enough. On the other hand, the 30 Nirvana realm disciples didn't care. They didn't take the true sword sect seriously at all, even though they had already been warned. This was a kind of belief that was deeply rooted in their hearts. They always felt that their own sect was the best. As for the true sword sect, they had also learned about it before. Although it seemed different from what they knew, it was impossible to change their opinion in a short period of time. Therefore, they felt that coming here to cultivate was just a formality. The elders of the 3 sects saw this kind of thinking and attitude, but they didn't remind them. There was no need for that. Only by understanding it themselves would they change their opinion and attitude. Patriarch, I think that since there are 3 great sects, the number of disciples who didn't die back then shouldn't be limited to just us. There should be even more. Patriarch, why don't you give the order for the disciples of the True God Sword sect to return to the True God Sword sect? As for the original first elder, he was now an elder. He had entered the profound Yang Sword Hall to cultivate in seclusion. He planned to refine a pure Yang Saint body. Breaking through from the peak of the 7-star Saint realm to the 7-star Saint realm had given him a lot of benefit. His saint body had been refined by a third, which was equivalent to shortening the refining effort by dozens of years. Once he had a pure Yang Saint body, his strength would be much stronger. An elder was actually equivalent to a supreme elder. At this level, they no longer needed to rack their brains for the development of the sect. They only needed to cultivate wholeheartedly and increase their strength. This was because a sect couldn't always rely on Chu Mu alone. An elder was equivalent to the true sword sect's reliance. The stronger the elder, the more powerful they could be when facing a strong enemy. At present, the true sword sect's elder group was still very weak. There was only 1 elder, but it was a good start. You're right, First Elder. Chu Mu nodded and said, then let's follow First Elder's instructions and send it out in the name of the true sword sect. Spread the news as far as possible. I will also ask the Tianyuan Palace and the Kanglan Empire to spread the news as far as possible." "Yes," said the first elder. A few days later, the news spread out. Very quickly, it spread throughout the Kanglan Empire and spread outside the Kanglan Empire. Originally, it was just a small matter. But now, the true God Sword Sect's banner had been raised. In a remote mountain village in a small domain outside the Kanglan Empire. Usually, it was very difficult for news to reach this place. But this time, with the help of the Kanglan Empire and the Tianyuan Palace, the true Sword Sect's sect returning order arrived like snow. Finally, it reached this small mountain village. In a simple yet unadorned courtyard sat an old man with white hair and a beard. He had a benevolent appearance, giving people a good impression of him with a single glance. The old man's face was ruddy, and his skin was like that of a baby's. He wore coarse white robes, but he gave off the air of an immortal. His 10 fingers were extremely nimble. As they weaved, a lifelike eagle was completed in his hands. Although it was only made of bamboo, it seemed to come alive. Next, the old man tapped the palm-sized bamboo eagle a few times. With a flap of its wings, the eagle actually took flight, soaring into the sky. True Sword Sect. Retracting his gaze from the bamboo eagle, the old man looked into the distance. His gaze was deep, as if it could penetrate thousands of miles. "Let me see just how much of the true God Sword Sect's glory you've left behind." With that, the old man's figure flashed and disappeared. Only a simple courtyard remained. The bamboo eagle that was still circling in the sky above lost its power and fell. The true God Sword Sect has already become history. Somewhere, a blind old man sighed emotionally. His trembling body and hunched back showed that he was only an ordinary person. The true Sword Sect, the peak of the sect master's peak. "Senior, who are you?" Chu-Mu looked at the white-robed old man standing in the air before him and asked seriously. Although the white robe seemed extremely simple and coarse, the old man's presence was deep and unfathomable. Chu-Mu knew that this person was an expert, an extremely powerful expert. At the very least, he was more powerful than regular 9-star saints. If an expert like that wanted to harm the true Sword Sect, he would definitely cause devastating damage to the sect. Of course, Chu-Mu would not allow that to happen. He still had trump cards, so Chu-Mu was not afraid. "So you're the sect master of the true Sword Sect. You're quite brave," the white-robed old man said with a smile. He descended from the air and landed near Chu-Mu. Under the power of his soul, the entire true Sword Sect was covered by him, so he understood everything. Afterwards, a sliver of surprise flashed across the white-robed old man's face. "Oh, not bad. There's actually another miniature world." Chu-Mu's expression did not change. It was not surprising that the old man could discover the existence of the profound Yang Sword world. "Senior, I am the sect master of the true Sword Sect. You should tell me why you've come," Chu-Mu said. "If you're a guest, my true Sword Sect will naturally entertain you. If you're an enemy, oh? Is there a supreme expert in the true Sword Sect?" The white-robed old man smiled. Chu-Mu only smiled and did not reply. "Didn't the true Sword Sect send out a sect-returning order?" The white-robed old man changed the topic, immediately causing Chu-Mu's breathing to quicken. "Back then, in the battle of the true God Sword Sect, almost everyone died. I was also heavily injured and on the verge of death. I was washed into the sea and was coincidentally saved by someone. In the end, I survived." Hearing the old man's words, Chu-Mu understood. So this old man was originally an elder of the true God Sword Sect. In that battle, the sky turned dark and countless people died. In the end, the true God Sword Sect was destroyed, and only a few disciples survived. As for the elder level, he did not know. Perhaps he was the only one. After that, he spent hundreds of years recuperating and living in seclusion. Now that he knew of the true Sword Sect's sect returning order, he came to take a look. Chapter 1630. The bright moon hung high in the night sky, and a faint white light shone down on the earth. At the top of the mountain, an old man and a young man sat on the ground. King Sword Sect, Looking Sword Sect, and Star Sword Sect were all created by the remaining disciples of the true God Sword Sect. Chumu said, "I know about these 3 sections. I went to see them once." The white-robed old man shook his head and said, "It's impossible for them to restore the glory of the true God Sword Sect." Chumu was silent for a moment. Actually, he did not know if the true God Sword Sect could reach the glory of the true God Sword Sect. He only did his best. "Do you know what conditions are needed to become the sect leader of the true God Sword Sect?" the white-robed old man asked. "The recognition of the Sword Sect Spirit Seal?" Chumu said with a questioning tone. After all, he definitely did not know as much about the true God Sword Sect as the old man in front of him. "That's right. Every generation's sect leader of the true God Sword Sect needs to obtain the recognition of the Sword Sect Spirit Seal," the white-robed old man said. His gaze became deep, as if he had traveled through thousands of years of time and space to return to the true God Sword Sect. Every generation's sect leader has obtained the recognition of the Sword Sect Spirit Seal. They are all extremely talented, and each of them can at least become a peerless expert. As the old man spoke, he suddenly stopped. His eyes widened, as if he had seen something unbelievable. For him, who had cultivated for thousands of years, this was definitely an unbelievable thing. What did he see? In Chumu's hand, a white object had appeared out of nowhere. It emitted a sparkling and translucent luster, and was as gentle as jade. Sword Sect Spirit Seal. The white-robed old man's tone seemed to be extremely strenuous, yet it was also filled with excitement. After that, with a thought, the Sword Sect Spirit Seal fell into his hand. After carefully sensing it, the old man seemed to have gone mad, and his tone was filled with both sorrow and joy. The Sword Sect Spirit Seal. It really is the Sword Sect Spirit Seal. I've seen the Sword Sect Spirit Seal again in my lifetime. Chumu could not understand that kind of feeling. The Sword Sect Spirit Seal had always been the inheritance treasure of the true God Sword Sect. It was the symbol of the sect master, and also a symbol of the true God Sword Sect. In the hearts of all the people of the true God Sword Sect, especially those in the upper echelons, it was supreme. The white-robed old man had been to 3 sects before, but he did not stay. Firstly, he felt that it was impossible for the 3 sects to recreate the glory of the true God Sword Sect. Secondly, the sect masters of the 3 sects did not obtain the Sword Sect Spirit Seal. The second point was the most important factor. That battle back then was incomparably tragic, with countless casualties. The sect master had also died in battle, and the Sword Sect Spirit Mark had disappeared along with him. I was lucky enough to survive. I spent a few hundred years recuperating, and when my injuries were almost healed, I immediately set out to search for the Sword Sect Spirit Seal. I searched for over 1,000 years, but I found nothing. In the end, I lived in seclusion in a small mountain village. The old man gradually calmed down and said, as if he was reminiscing, I didn't expect the Sword Sect Spirit Seal to be here. All of this is the will of the heavens." As if he was talking to himself, the Sword Sect Spirit Seal flew up and landed in Chumu's hand. The white-robed old man immediately performed 3 sword salutes to Chumu. The 14th elder of the true God Sword Sect greets the sect master. The white-robed old man's attitude was completely different from his previous casual attitude. There was a kind of respect that came from the bottom of his heart. However, Chumu understood that rather than saying that the old man respected him, it was more accurate to say that he respected the Sword Sect Spirit Seal. He had obtained the recognition of the Sword Sect Spirit Seal, and had also obtained the old man's respect and recognition. Whether the old man respected him or the Sword Sect Spirit Seal, there was no difference in Chumu's eyes. He was happy that the True Sword sect might have an expert overseeing it. Senior, the True God Sword sect has already become history, but the new True Sword sect is rising. In the future, it will definitely be able to recreate the glory of the True God Sword sect. Chu Mu said, I implore Senior to stay behind and oversee the True Sword sect. The current True Sword sect is still too weak. As you wish, Sect Master, said the white-robed old man. Chu Mu let out a sigh of relief. The old man had once been an elder of the True Sword sect. Now that he was overseeing the True Sword sect, the defensive power of the True Sword sect would increase even further. May I ask how I should address you, elder? Chu Mu asked. My surname is Dugu, and my name is Chong, said the white-robed old man. Dugu Chong. May I ask what level of strength you possess, elder? Chu Mu asked seriously. According to the classification, I should be a supreme expert above 9-star Saint tier and below Saint King, said the white-robed old man. The white-robed old man said. There was no boasting in his tone. Instead, there was a hint of helplessness. Back then, although he was an elder, he was only a 7-star saint. He knew that although his talent was not bad, reaching 9-star saint was his limit. What he did not expect was that in the battle of the True God Sword sect, he was heavily injured and on the verge of death before he was rescued. He spent hundreds of years recovering from his injuries and thousands of years searching for the Sword Sect spiritual seal. Although he did not find the Sword Sect spiritual seal, he had some fortuitous encounters and some gains in the process. After that, he retired to a small mountain village and cultivated his body and mind. His cultivation increased, and he unknowingly broke through to the level that he had always dreamed of. However, the True God Sword sect had long ceased to exist. All right, from now on, you will be an elder of the True Sword sect. You will oversee the True Sword sect. Chu Mu was overjoyed when he heard that. Only a first-rate force would have a supreme expert overseeing it. Now, the True Sword sect, which could only be considered a second-rate force, had a supreme expert overseeing it. Dugu Chong obeys the sect master's order. The white-robed elder was also very serious as he bowed to the sect master. No need to be so courteous, elder. The safety of the True Sword sect will still depend on you in the future, Chu Mu said. This is my duty, Dugu Chong said with a smile. Dugu Chong smiled. His mood suddenly improved. When he saw the Sword Sect's spirit seal, the stone in his heart fell, and he heaved a sigh of relief. And this sect master had obtained the recognition of the Sword Sect spiritual seal. He must be an amazing person who could definitely lead the True Sword Sect to become stronger. Chu Mu summoned the elder. His surname was Zhao. The elder looked at Dugu Chong's face in a daze. Elder Zhao, Dugu Chong was an elder of the True God Sword sect back then, Chu Mu said. Dugu. Elder Zhao sank into his memories. After a dozen breaths, Elder Zhao's body trembled. He stared at Dugu Chong in disbelief. Could it be Elder Dugu Chong? That's me, Dugu Chong said. Zhao Yuanzi, an official disciple of the True God Sword sect, greets Elder Dugu. Elder Zhao's tears flowed. The True God Sword sect has passed. Now is the era of the True Sword sect. Dugu Chong's heart was also very complicated, but he controlled his emotions and said in a low voice. Chu Mu was very happy with Dugu Chong's arrival. A peerless expert was incomparably useful to the True Sword sect. Although Chu Mu had the Sword Sect spiritual seal, and there were not only peerless experts in the Sword Sect spiritual seal, but there were also Saint Kings. However, they would only act for Chu Mu once. Otherwise, Chu Mu had planned to let one of them stay in the True Sword Sect. Now, this problem was solved. In this era where Saint Kings didn't appear, a peerless expert was the supreme fighting force. The profound Yang Sword realm wasn't strong enough to withstand a peerless expert. Therefore, Dugu Chong only restrained his aura and entered the profound Yang Sword hall to take a look. Chu Mu also brought him to see the sword techniques he had comprehended and written down from the myriad sword steel. If the sword sect's spiritual seal was the proof of the sect master, then the myriad sword steel was the foundation of the true God sword sect. Now that both were here, Duguchong had a kind of confidence that the true sword sect would definitely be able to develop and become stronger, and even regain its glory. Soon after, Chu Mu was pleasantly surprised to find that not only did Duguchong have the strength of a peerless expert, but he also had extremely profound attainments in the Tao of puppetry. He even surpassed Chu Mu. Chu Mu and Duguchong had a discussion on the Tao of puppetry. Sect Master, I didn't expect you to have such attainments in the Tao of puppetry. Duguchong was also very surprised. Although Chu Mu's attainments in the Tao of puppetry weren't as good as his, it was still not bad. Furthermore, Chu Mu's understanding of the Tao of puppetry was actually much more complete than his. I obtained the relevant inheritance in the eternal sacred city. Chu Mu smiled and said, however, I don't have the time to study it now. Why don't I hand it over to Grand Elder? As he spoke, Chu Mu transmitted the contents of the Heavenly Eye Secret Manual into Duguchong's mind. At the same time, he also transmitted the cultivation method of the Rainbow Ring. What an exquisite secret manual, the Heavenly Eye Secret Manual, the inheritance of the ancient puppet sect. The more Duguchong read, the more excited he became. His white beard rose up and down, and his eyes were wide open, emitting a strong light. There's actually a level 7 primordial spirit defense secret manual. Only now did he know that this seemingly young sect master actually had such a shocking foundation. Apart from cultivation, Duguchong also liked to study the Tao of puppetry. Unfortunately, the manuals he had on the Tao of puppetry were only ordinary ones. They were scattered and scattered. The reason he could reach his current level of attainment in the Tao of puppetry was the result of thousands of years of research. Now that he had obtained the inheritance of the Heavenly Eye Secret Manual, he had even more complete and profound guidance. With his deep accumulation, he would definitely be able to make another huge breakthrough in the Tao of puppetry. Chu Mu was also relieved. Although the puppets in the puppet cave were very difficult to destroy, some damage was inevitable over a long period of time. In the true sword sect, only Chu Mu knew how to repair the puppets. However, as the sect master, how could he always repair the puppets? Over time, the puppet cave might very well lose its effectiveness. That was no longer the case. Apart from his own cultivation, Duguchong also studied the Tao of puppetry in the true sword sect. He could create more and more powerful puppets, and those puppets might even become the powerful guards of the true sword sect. As for the Rainbow Ring Primordial Spirit Defense Secret Manual, it was a Level 7 Primordial Spirit Defense Secret Manual. It was just right for Duguchong to cultivate. This was because one of the prerequisites to becoming a peerless expert was to have a Level 7 Primordial Spirit. Chapter 1631. Thousands of years ago, the true God Sword sect had dominated the sea and was viewed as a thorn in the side of the sea race. Although the Heavenly Saint cult was a human force, they also viewed the true God Sword sect as an enemy. Elder Zhao was an official disciple of the true God Sword sect back then and didn't know much about it. He thought that the Heavenly Saint cult was the main culprit behind the true God Sword sect's extermination, but the truth wasn't so. What caused the true God Sword sect's extermination was an unforeseen event that even Duguchong wasn't clear about. That event was a disaster, causing many strong practitioners of the true God Sword sect to die. Only then did the sea race find an opportunity. After that, the Heavenly Saint cult was just there to take advantage of the situation. Under the incomparably tragic battle back then, there were tens of thousands of people in the true God Sword sect. Almost all of them died. Occasionally there were fish that escaped the net, but they couldn't do anything. Duguchong was saved from the brink of death and survived in the end. However, this kind of situation was extremely rare. It might even be that Duguchong was the only one. The others were like the sect masters of the three sects who went out to carry out missions or were forcefully chased away by their masters, leaving behind sparks. There were also people like Elder Zhao and the other elders who were only official disciples and didn't have the right to participate in that level of battle. They were lucky not to have died. Even if a portion of them didn't die after thousands of years, there were countless possibilities. Those who died were dead, and those who were crippled were crippled. Thus, several months had passed since the True Sword sect issued the order to return to the sect. Duguchong had arrived, and another few months had passed since. 2 more saint-level experts had arrived, but they were only at the 5-star saint level. One was called Waveshift and the other was called Xingjiu. They were not disciples of the True God Sword sect, but the descendants of 2 elders of the True God Sword sect. These 2 people had been taught everything about the True God Sword sect by their fathers since birth. They were to search for the Sword sect spirit mark, and if they saw someone recognized by the Sword sect spirit mark, they were to assist him, and so on. Now, they had also heard the sect returning order and hurried over. With an attitude of trying, after Chumu took out the Sword sect spirit mark, the 2 of them joined the True God Sword sect. The talents of these 2 people were quite good and could be classified as geniuses. They were able to surpass a small level and defeat strong enemies. Therefore, they were included in the Lingshao Sword Cavalry and became Sword Cavalry Guard. The number of Sword Cavalry Guards increased from 10 to 12. Another few months had passed, but no one from the True God Sword sect or related descendants had come. Presumably it was either too far away or that was it. However, at least someone had come. It was not bad, especially Duguchong. This peerless expert was enough to protect the True Sword sect. Of course, the current True Sword sect was in a peculiar state where it was neither strong nor weak. It could not compare to a super first-rate organization like the Heavenly Yuan Palace, let alone a sacred ground like the Kanglan Empire. However, compared to other first-rate organizations, Duguchong alone was enough to protect the True Sword sect. Duguchong had studied the Tao of puppetry for thousands of years and had accumulated an extremely deep foundation. After obtaining the Heavenly Python secret manual and comprehending it for a period of time, he had integrated the Tao of puppetry and his attainments had become even more profound. He was like a strong man who had astonishing strength but did not know how to use it. After receiving systematic training, he had mastered his own strength and could unleash 100% or even 120% of it. With Duguchong, the puppet cave was further improved. More saint-level puppets were created to cooperate with the puppet formation to guard various parts of the True Sword sect. As for the heavenly puppets, they were too precious. Chumu could not give them to Duguchong to study. If he wanted to study them, they would have to be taken apart. At present, he had 4 heavenly puppets. He had 1 with him. The remaining 3 had already gained sentience. Taking them apart would cause them great damage. Although Duguchong wanted to study them, he also knew the difficulty and key points. Therefore, he did not dare to do it. He only studied the Tao of puppetry. He would not touch the heavenly puppets for now. Duguchong also planned to choose 1 or 2 disciples who were interested in the Tao of puppetry as his disciples to teach the Tao of puppetry. However, this would require a long period of observation. After nearly a year, the True Sword sect had become even stronger. Chumu also gave the Profound Yang Sword token to all the Soaring Firmament Sword Cavalry, allowing them to enter the Profound Yang Sword world to cultivate. Although Jian Quangxing was a peak 7-star saint expert, he could enter the Profound Yang Sword world to temper his saint body and comprehend secret sword manuals, sword arts, and so on. It would not cause any harm to the Profound Yang Sword world. As for the others, they could make good use of the pure Yang Qi to cultivate. The 10 esoteric disciples also finally obtained the Profound Yang Sword token. After experiencing the puppet cave and spiritual pool, the 10 of them had already reached the peak of the 9th heavenly layer of nirvana. After consolidating for a period of time, they could begin to break through to the eternal realm. Once they succeeded in breaking through to the eternal realm in the profound Yang Sword world, they would be able to temper their pure Yang Saint body and become even stronger. What made Chu Mu regretful was that the profound Yang Sword world he obtained did not have any cultivation method for the pure Yang Saint body. Otherwise, it would be even better. After nearly a year, Chu Mu's harvest was not small. Duguchong was an elder of the True God Sword sect and had extraordinary knowledge. Now that he had become a peerless expert, his realm was higher than Chu Mu's. Under his guidance, Chu Mu's self-created sword moves were further perfected. Unfortunately, Elder Duguchong's sword force had been at the peak of the 9th level for many years and had not broken through. According to him, the next level of sword force would be even stronger. It was called the sword intent. When Chu Mu heard about it, he was very surprised and also very expectant. The true intent of sword seemed to belong to the same lineage as the true intent of piercing, true intent of slashing, true intent of defense, and true intent of qi that he had comprehended before. However, according to Duguchong, the true intent of sword was much harder to comprehend than the other true intents. Duguchong had spent thousands of years and still hadn't been able to comprehend it. One of the reasons for this was that his talent in sword Dao was indeed not strong enough. But there was also another reason, and that was that the difficulty of comprehending the true intent of sword was too high. Chu Mu did not know how long it would take for him to comprehend the sword intent. Perhaps it would take a few years, a few decades, or a few centuries. However, at least he knew the next level of sword force. At least, it was equivalent to having a goal. Cultivating with a goal was more motivating than cultivating without a goal. Otherwise, without a goal, one would be at a loss. If one was at a loss for a long time, it was inevitable that one would not be able to persevere and give up halfway. During this period of time, Chu Tsongfeng constantly battled with Chu Mu and also received Chu Mu's teachings. He was becoming more and more mature, and could completely take charge of things on his own. Everything in the True Sword sect was on the right track. There was no need for Chu Mu to worry about their safety. It's time to leave. At the top of the sect master's peak, Chu Mu finished his cultivation and looked at the horizon. It had been a few years since he returned to the True Sword sect. In these few years, the True Sword sect's strength had undergone tremendous changes. Now, even if the imperial dynasty came for revenge, as long as they did not send too many experts, the True Sword sect had nothing to fear with Duguchong around. Of course, if the imperial dynasty's war monarch personally came, Duguchong would not be a match for him. However, the Kanglan dynasty would not stand by and do nothing. The True Sword sect could be said to have the ability to protect themselves now. After half a month, the 10 esoteric disciples all successfully broke through to the first sky of the Aeon realm. Naturally, they also became Ling Shao Sword Cavalry Quasi-Guards. The new 10 esoteric disciples were also being selected. Today, Chu Mu, Gu Luankong, Yang Zhantian, and Lien Hongyun left the True Sword sect again. This time, Chu Mu did not know how long it would take for him to return to the True Sword sect. Because this time, his goal was to find the deep blue God Pearl and unlock the secrets of the world. Every time Chu Mu left, he would not hide it. Therefore, whether it was the elders, the sword cavalry, or the disciples, they all knew that their sect master was going to leave again. Every time sect master left and came back, his cultivation would be higher and his strength would be stronger. Therefore, they weren't surprised by Chu Mu's departure. They were still looking forward to the next time sect master came back, just how powerful he would be. On a blue flying ship, there were only 4 people, Chu Mu, Gu Luankong, and Lien Hongyun. The flying ship took off from the True Sword sect and turned into a ray of blue light in the eyes of the elders and disciples. It was like a meteor streaking across the sky as it flew into the distance. In the blink of an eye, the blue flying ship disappeared into the horizon. Inside the flying ship, Chu Mu, Gu Luankong, and Lien Hongyun were drinking wine. My strength was originally not as good as yours. Now that our cultivation has been pulled apart, the gap is even bigger. Lien Hongyun said bitterly as she drank. In the past few years of cultivating in the True Sword sect, their cultivation had also increased. All of them had reached the mid-stage of the first sky of the Aeon realm. Ordinary first sky of the Aeon realm would need at least 10 years to reach the mid-stage. However, they were talented, and with the help of the profound Yang Sword Palace, they were able to reach the mid-stage in a few years. The increase in cultivation from the early stage to the mid-stage of the Aeon realm wasn't that obvious. However, other than the increase in cultivation, their sword skills and other aspects had also improved significantly. Naturally, they were much stronger. Compared to others, such an improvement should be considered very large. However, compared to Chu Mu, it couldn't compare. The difference was too large. They were both at the early stage of the first sky of the Aeon realm, but Chu Mu was at the early stage of the second sky of the Aeon realm. Not only did the difference not decrease, it actually increased. Furthermore, they were all cultivating, unlike Chu Mu, who had to take care of other aspects as the sect leader. It was no wonder that Lien Hongyun was depressed. It's mainly because of the 100-year secret realm. Chu Mu smiled and said honestly. The 100-year secret realm could be said to be a great opportunity for him. Otherwise, his cultivation would still be at the early stage of the first sky of the Aeon realm. At most, he would be at the peak of the early stage of the Aeon realm. The 100-year secret realm is indeed a magical place. Gu Luankong said. This was an opportunity. Some people could obtain it, while others couldn't. It couldn't be forced. Chapter 1632. Chu Mu, Gu Luankong and the other two walked out of the Wind Pavilion. This was the Ancient Heaven Domain. The Ancient Heaven Domain was known as the #1 domain in the Deep Blue Continent. Hence, Chu Mu and the others came to the Ancient Heaven Domain after leaving the True Sword sect. The first thing they did was to gather information. Without a doubt, the Wind Pavilion was the most suitable place. Chu Mu didn't lack origin pills now. This time, they asked about the Deep Blue God Pearl. However, there were only 18 Deep Blue God Pearls. Chu Mu had 4 of them in his pocket space. The Imperial clan had been searching for the Deep Blue God Pearl for many years. It would be a lie if they said they didn't have any. Maybe they had a few, maybe even more than Chu Mu. The other Deep Blue God Pearls might be in the hands of others or in some secret place. Although the Wind Pavilion was well informed, they weren't omniscient. They didn't get any information about the Deep Blue God Pearl. However, they got 2 other pieces of information. The first piece of information was about the emergence of a new power after Chu Mu and the others left the Ancient Heaven Domain. In a big domain like the Ancient Heaven Domain, there were powers disappearing and new powers appearing every day. It wasn't strange for a new power to appear. Unless the guest had a special request, the Wind Pavilion wouldn't pay attention to it. However, this new force was different. Although it wasn't very strong, it was very outstanding. This was because this new force wasn't formed by a sect or a family, but an alliance. Secondly, in this force, every member was a sword saint. Lastly, every sword saint was extraordinary. According to the standard of geniuses, every one of them was at least a yellow-grade genius. Although yellow-grade geniuses were the lowest in the entire genius system, they were still geniuses. They were better than ordinary cultivators. One had to know that there might not even be one yellow-grade genius among hundreds of cultivators. This new power didn't have many members. There were only 30 or so of them. The highest cultivation base was at the early stage of the 3rd sky of the immemorial realm. The lowest cultivation base was at the early stage of the 1st sky of the immemorial realm. How could a force formed by a group of genius sword saints not attract the attention of others? Moreover, this force was rather high profile, which made it easier for them to attract attention. In addition, many first-rate and super-first-rate forces had extended olive branches to them, wanting to recruit them into their respective forces. They had promised them great things, but they did not. This made this force even more famous. Originally, although such a force had become famous, Chu Mu and the others would not pay too much attention to it. However, when they heard the name of this new force, they had the idea to investigate it. I estimate that very few people will survive after entering the deep blue world. A one-star high-level sword saint said. That's right. Otherwise, our sword alliance wouldn't only have over 30 people after a few years. Another advanced one-star sword saint chimed in. Other than the two of them, there were 3 other people present. They were all one-star sword saints. Do you guys think that the famous Chu Mu from a few years ago is the same person as the number 1 on the Heaven Youth Leaderboard, Chu Mu? The world was so big and there were so many people. It was not surprising for people with the same name to have the same surname. If they continued investigating, they might be able to find hundreds or thousands of Chu Mu in the deep blue world. It was normal to have the same surname and name. Although the probability of having the same surname and talent was low, it was still possible. Therefore, they did not know if the legendary genius Chu Mu was the Chu Mu that they knew. They did not know if it was him or not. If it was him and he joined the Sword Alliance, the Sword Alliance would become stronger. Ancient God Sword Alliance. It sounds familiar, said Lian Hongyun. I wonder if it's them, said Yang Zhantian. They were referring to the human swordsmen who came from the ancient god realm. At that time, there were so many talented Nirvana realm cultivators who entered the deep blue world. Most of them died in the spatial passage storm. Some of them were killed by the native experts of the deep blue world. No one knew how many of them survived. This new force was called the Ancient God Sword Alliance. The 2 words, Ancient God, made them think of the ancient god realm. The 2 words, Sword Alliance, also made them think, because the human cultivators of the ancient god realm were all sword cultivators. The meaning of the 2 words, Ancient God Sword Alliance, extended to the Sword Cultivator Alliance of the ancient god realm. Of course, this was only the association of Chu Mu and the other 3. They still needed to find out whether it was true or not. Perhaps it was just the meaning was similar. According to the information from the Wind Whisper Tower, the Ancient God Sword Alliance only had one location, which was in Tianxiang City. Chu Mu and the other 3 rushed into Tianxiang City and soon arrived at the Ancient God Sword Alliance's encampment. The location was beside the main road. It was a 5-story building. A huge plaque was erected with the words, Ancient God Sword Alliance. It could be seen from afar. It was clear and eye-catching, as if it couldn't wait for others to know about it. Chu Mu and the other 3 were speechless. If it were them, they wouldn't be so high-profile. One could tell a person's character from their actions. If this encampment was decided by a person, it meant that that person's character was more flamboyant. This thought flashed across their mind. This had nothing to do with Chu Mu and the others. They were just here to confirm the origin of the Ancient God Sword Alliance. The door of the Ancient God Sword Alliance was open. Chu Mu and the other 3 walked in. Immediately, someone came to greet them. It was a low-level Nirvana realm sword cultivator dressed like a servant. May I know why the 4 of you have come to the Ancient God Sword Alliance? Although the servant's cultivation wasn't high, he wasn't afraid in front of Chu Mu and the others. Instead, he asked directly, Is the Alliance Master of the Sword Alliance here? Chu Mu asked. The Alliance Master is out for some matters and hasn't returned yet. The servant replied, however, the Vice Alliance Master is here. Can you inform the Vice Alliance Master that the 4 of us are here to visit? Chu Mu asked. Seniors, please wait for a moment, the green-robed servant said before retreating. Not long after, a person came down from downstairs. The fluctuating aura let Chu Mu and the others know that this was a martial saint expert. However, he was only a 1-star martial saint. When the one-star martial saint expert saw Chu Mu and the other three, he was stunned. You. The other party stuttered. When Chu Mu saw the other party, he suddenly felt that the other party looked familiar. It was as if he had seen him somewhere before. He knew that he definitely hadn't seen him in the deep blue world. Memories flashed in Xiao Chen's mind, and many faces flashed by. The development of a cultivator's brain exceeded that of an ordinary person. Their memory was even more powerful. The stronger the soul of a cultivator, the more outstanding they would be in this aspect. Especially for someone like Chu Mu, he was even more powerful than other cultivators. In his memory, the scene finally froze. Chu Mu also knew who the other party was. One of the people on the Tianqing leaderboard. He even remembered the last place. Chu Mu remembered. Gu Luankong also remembered. Then, Yang Zhantian and Lian Hongyun also remembered. The four of them couldn't help but exchange glances. It seemed that the ancient God Sword Alliance was really, "You're all still alive. That's great." This person's tone was very excited. Back then, he participated in the Tianqing Leaderboard's Supreme Seat Challenge and ended up in the 38th Supreme Seat. He was extremely talented and powerful. He was a true genius. In the deep blue world, he was the standard of a peerless genius. He was lucky to enter the deep blue world and didn't die under the pursuit. Instead, he had a fortuitous encounter under the protection of the Tianqing Leaderboard's providence. His cultivation had increased and his strength had become even stronger. The providence of the Tianqing Leaderboard was indeed very good and could protect them. However, it wasn't absolute. The higher the ranking, the greater the protection. Therefore, those geniuses on the Tianqing Leaderboard had a higher chance of survival if they were ranked at the top. Those ranked at the bottom had a lower chance of survival. Chu Mu also didn't know if the first Shensi of the Heavenly Sword Hall had also survived. After a few exchanges, Chu Mu and the other three finally confirmed that the Ancient God Sword Alliance was indeed the Sword Cultivator Alliance of the Ancient God World. There were more than 30 members and all of them were human swordsmen from the Ancient God World. However, there were only 2 people on the Tianqing Leaderboard. One was the 38th Supreme Seat Su Yingqing, and the other was the 42nd Supreme Seat Gu de Su Yingqing. Sounded very excited. Chu Mu was the first Supreme Seat on the Tianqing Leaderboard. Gu Luankong was the second Supreme Seat, Yang Zhantian was the third Supreme Seat, and Lian Hongyun was the 7th Supreme Seat. Although his cultivation base had reached the early stage of the first sky of the Aeon due to a fortuitous encounter, which was quite close to the 3 of them, and his strength had increased greatly, he didn't have the confidence to fight against any of them. This feeling, this difference, had already been decided back then. Towards Chu Mu and the other 3, Su Yingqing only had admiration in his heart. Especially towards Chu Mu, he even had a feeling of worship. Therefore, when he saw them recently, he was so excited. Under Su Yingqing's lead, Chu Mu and the other 3 arrived at the 2nd floor of the Ancient God Sword Alliance building. This was the place where the members of the Ancient God Sword Alliance usually gathered. The members of the Ancient God Sword Alliance were basically all present on the 2nd floor. Deputy Alliance Leader, everyone, we have new companions again. Su Yingqing announced excitedly as soon as he arrived. Come, everyone, take a look at who they are. They are definitely people you will not expect. Immediately, everyone's gaze fell on Chu Mu and the other 3. Chu Mu. Gu Luankong. You are Yang Zhantian. You are Lian Hongyun. Gu De stood up with a look of disbelief on his face. All the geniuses on the Tianqing Leaderboard admired Chu Mu. Therefore, it was inevitable that they would feel excited when they saw them. However, the others didn't look excited. They were just a little surprised. At this moment, one of the people sitting at the head of the table stood up and laughed. I didn't expect our Sword Alliance to attract the top 10 geniuses on the Tianqing Leaderboard. Welcome, welcome. I welcome you all on behalf of the Alliance leader. I believe the Alliance leader will be very happy to see you all when he returns. Chapter 1633. The vice leader of the Ancient God Sword Alliance was called Xing Liang. He was at the early third sky of the Ancient God Sword Alliance. Among the people present, his cultivation was the highest, followed by the other three who were at the peak second sky of the Ancient God Sword Alliance. Before entering the deep blue world, Xing Liang's cultivation base was already at the peak of the ninth heavenly layer of Nirvana realm. After entering the deep blue world, he had a fortuitous encounter and successfully broke through to the eternal realm. Not only did his cultivation base break through, but his aptitude also improve. At first, Xing Liang was just sizing up Chu Mu and the other three. After seeing their cultivation levels, he became more enthusiastic. One by one, he introduced Chu Mu and the other three to the Alliance members present so they could get to know each other. They were all swordsmen from the ancient god world. Although they didn't know each other before, they were still from the same hometown. After the introductions, they quickly became familiar with each other. The Ancient God Sword Alliance was established by the Alliance leader and me. Xing Liang said, "The Alliance leader is called Yang Fan. His cultivation level is the same as mine, but he is stronger than me. After entering the deep blue world, we had a fortuitous encounter and broke through to the ancient god realm. After that, our cultivation levels increased rapidly. However, we didn't forget our purpose of coming here. After many investigations, we finally confirmed that the world spirit is related to a secret." Xing Liang didn't directly tell them what the secret was. Instead, he looked at Chu Mu and the other three and asked, "I wonder if the four of you have discovered any secrets after being here for so many years?" This was a very straightforward question. "The deep blue god pearl," Chu Mu said calmly. "That's right. The world spirit is related to the deep blue god pearl. As long as we can find all the deep blue god pearls, we can open the center of the world." Xing Liang's eyes lit up and he said with certainty. This made Chu Mu and the other three feel puzzled. Xing Liang seemed to know more about the secret than they did. "It's a pity." Xing Liang shook his head and sighed. "There are only 18 deep blue god pearls. Until now, we haven't found any. I wonder if the four of you have found anything? Although we know about the deep blue god pearls and have heard of them, we haven't found anything." Chu Mu shook his head and said. Gu Luankong and the other two also knew that Chu Mu was lying. However, they didn't say anything. Instead, they felt that it was reasonable. After all, Chu Mu had the deep blue divine pearl, and one of them was even given to him by them. With their relationship, there was no problem in telling the truth. After all, they were all monstrous geniuses in the top 10 of the Heaven Azure rankings. Each of them had pride in their bones. They weren't petty people, and they didn't want to be petty people. Moreover, the four of them had been through life and death situations together. They could trust each other. They were the kind of people who could entrust their backs to each other. But the others in the Ancient God Sword League, in the end, were just acquaintances. Although they were all from the ancient god world, they did not know each other well enough. There was no basis for trust. How could Chu Mu reveal the fact that he had deep blue sacred pearls, and 4 of them at that? Hearing Chu Mu's words, Xing Liang and the others didn't doubt it at all. They felt that it should be true. That sentence was just a test. Since it wasn't true, it wouldn't be mentioned again. This time, our league leader went out to scout for information. It's very likely that it's related to one of the deep blue sacred pearls. Xing Liang took a deep breath and said seriously, "Now, we just have to wait for our league leader to come back and see the situation." Their conversation didn't leak out, because the surroundings were set up with a very high level of soundproofing seal. In addition, they deliberately lowered their voices and controlled it. Only those within their small range could hear it. Chu Mu's group of 4 stayed in the Ancient God Sword League for the time being. No matter what, this was an organization of people from the same hometown. Moreover, after coming to the deep blue world, as long as they were still alive, they seemed to have a good harvest. Everyone's cultivation had increased, and their strength had increased. Moreover, they all had their own channels. It was better than the four of them to complete the mission. To Chumu, it didn't matter to him who found the spirit of the world and who received the recognition of the spirit of the world, as long as it was a human. Once the mission was completed, the human sword cultivators of the ancient god world would enter the deep blue world en masse. At that time, an intense battle would be unavoidable. To the deep blue world, they were probably invaders. However, Chumu didn't care about this. He was more concerned about his own path. After completing the mission, where should he go? Should he return to the ancient god world? Or should he stay in the deep blue world? He had considered this question before, but each time, he only thought about it briefly. He didn't think too deeply because he didn't know the answer. The Ancient God Sword League had 5 floors. Each floor was very big. Chumu's group of 4 were separated. According to the rules of the Ancient God Sword League, the levels they lived on were different. First Heaven of the Eternal Realm lived on the 3rd floor, Second Heaven of the Eternal Realm lived on the 4th floor, and Third Heaven of the Eternal Realm lived on the 5th floor. Chumu was at the early Second Heaven of the Eternal Realm, so he was arranged to live on the 4th floor. Gu Luankong, Yang Zhantian, and Lian Hongyun were arranged to live on the 3rd floor. It didn't matter if they were 1 floor apart. Chumu, you're number 1 on the Heavenly Azure ranking. I heard that your sword technique is exceptional. I wonder what level you've reached. Why don't we have a spar? Gong Rushan said to Chumu, his tone carrying a bit of provocation. Back then, if we weren't older, who knows who would have taken the number 1 spot on the Heaven Azure list? Yen Jinkong said. Back then, the age limit for the Heaven Azure list was below 100 years old. Many geniuses couldn't participate. Naturally, they weren't convinced. They didn't have a chance before, but now that they were together, they couldn't help but mention it. However, different people had different attitudes. Although Gong Rushan's tone was provocative, it didn't have any malicious intent. It was purely a challenge. Yen Jinkong's tone was different. His attitude wasn't as good. No matter if it was Gong Rushan or Yen Jinkong, their cultivation was above Chumu's. They were at the advanced Second Heaven of the Eternal Realm. When they came to the deep blue world, they were at the late 9th Heaven of the Nirvana Realm. Sure. Chumu didn't reject Gong Rushan's suggestion. The Ancient Divine Sword Tower of the Ancient Divine Sword League had 5 floors. Aside from that, there was also a backyard. It was a very spacious backyard that could be used as a place for League members to practice their swordsmanship. Of course, such a backyard did not have any defensive capabilities. Thus, when practicing their swordsmanship, they would not use too much power and would only practice their swordsmanship. The news of Chumu and Gong Rushan's sword duel spread quickly. Immediately, many alliance members came to watch. Back then, he was the number 1 on the Heaven Azure list. Rumor has it that his sword skills were unparalleled. I wonder how profound they are? I think they should be pretty good. Otherwise, they wouldn't have said that his sword skills were unparalleled. I don't think so. The Heaven Azure list has an age limit. Only those below 100 years old can participate. How many years has he been practicing his sword skills? Of course, his sword skills might be pretty good, but that's relative. He was only famous among swordsmen below 100 years old. Yen Jinkong said again. He really didn't believe that Chumu's sword skills were that profound. He felt that his own sword skills were definitely above Chumu's. It was normal for Yen Jinkong to have such thoughts. After all, his own sword skills were very profound. Within the sect, he was invincible among his peers. Many of the older generation couldn't be compared to him. This wasn't something that happened overnight. It was accumulated over a long period of time. Therefore, Yen Jinkong had such confidence in himself. In fact, the Alliance members present were all top geniuses in their respective sections. After coming to the Deep Blue world, they had more or less had some fortuitous encounters. They became stronger and their sword skills became more profound. Therefore, they were very confident in themselves. However, some of them were overconfident while some of them were still very confident. Yan Jinkong's confidence was overconfident. Gong Rushan drew his sword. With a flick of his wrist, a sword flower bloomed and attacked Chu Mu from all directions. This was a pure sword skill that didn't contain any sword energy. In a battle of the sword, it was a battle of the subtlety and skill of the sword's skill. The blazing brilliance spiritual sword appeared in Chu Mu's hand. The sword stabbed out in a straight trajectory. It was like a line between the sky and the sea, as if there was no beginning or end. This was an application of the Skyline sword style. Its power couldn't be compared to the real Skyline sword style. However, Chu Mu, who had completely grasped the essence of it, could transform it into an ordinary sword skill. In everyone's eyes, Chu Mu's sword seemed to have turned into a line connecting the sky and the sea. There was no beginning or end. It extended endlessly and there was nowhere it couldn't reach. The blooming sword flower was shattered by Chu Mu's sword. The endless line of sword light arrived in front of Gong Rushan in an instant. There was no way for him to dodge. It went straight between his eyebrows and finally fell between his eyebrows. Gong Rushan felt a chill coming from between his eyebrows. I lost. Gong Rushan was a little confused and bitter. He thought his swordsmanship was pretty good, but he didn't expect that he couldn't even withstand one strike from his opponent. Then, he laughed. His real strength lay not in his swordsmanship, but in other aspects. So, it didn't matter if he lost. You have some skills. Yan Jinkong's eyes flashed with a touch of fear, but he said so. Good sword skill. Let me have a try. Another person jumped out. Before Chu Mu could answer, he directly slashed at Chu Mu with his sword. Under this sword, it was like an invisible mountain descending, suppressing the earth and bringing great pressure to Chu Mu. This was a vision of sword skill. From this point of view, this person's sword skill was obviously more profound than Gong Rushan's. However, this kind of sword skill could only be regarded as good for Chu Mu. He didn't use any other moves. Just like before, he stabbed out with his sword. The line connecting the sky and the sea extended endlessly without beginning or end, breaking mountains and shattering mountains. Amazing. This person was much more open-minded than Gong Rushan. After being defeated by Chu Mu, he didn't feel depressed at all. Instead, he laughed. Since he had drawn his sword and defeated two people, Chu Mu simply looked around and invited, "Who else wants to fight? Good sword skill. Let me have a try." Another person came out with a smile. Chapter 1634. No wonder Brother Chu is known for his unparalleled sword skills. He is indeed unfathomable. Within the ancient God Sword Alliance, there were more than 10 people who fought with Chu Mu. However, they could only exchange 3 moves with Chu Mu. After 3 moves, they would definitely lose. Such sword skills were unparalleled. Of course, there were also people who were unconvinced. They did not fight with Chu Mu as they were afraid of being defeated. However, they did not show it directly. In the ancient God Sword Alliance, other than interacting with others, they could only cultivate by themselves. In the blink of an eye, more than 10 days passed. The Alliance leader is back with good news. Everyone, come out and listen. Xing Liang sent a message. Soon, everyone came to the second floor and sat down. Chu Mu, this is my seat. Just as Chu Mu sat down, a cold voice came from behind him. He turned around and saw Yan Jinkong. He squinted his eyes and stared at him coldly. Chu Mu did not say anything. His expression did not change. He stood up and gave his seat to Yan Jinkong. He then sat down elsewhere. Here, the seats are based on strength. Those with strength can sit where they are. Yan Jinkong snorted and glanced at Chu Mu. He then sat down. Everyone saw this scene with their eyes, but none of them said anything. Chu Mu, don't mind it. This is the rule set by the alliance leader. Xing Liang pretended to be the good guy and explained with a smile, nothing can be accomplished without rules. Although the ancient God Sword Alliance is a new force, it is not an idle organization. The seats are based on strength. The stronger you are, the closer your seat is to the front. The seat in the middle is the alliance leader's seat. Xing Liang pointed at the empty seat beside him and said. As Xing Liang explained, Yan Zhenkong glanced at Chu Mu again. In his eyes, a sliver of disdain seemed to flash. It was as if he was telling Chu Mu that it didn't matter how good his sword technique was. In front of absolute strength, everything else was just decoration. Gu Luankong and the other two glanced at Yan Zhenkong and didn't say anything. There was no need for them to argue. They didn't like it. Including Chu Mu and the other three, there were a total of 38 people present. The seat at the front was empty, which belonged to the Alliance Master. 15 minutes passed, but the Alliance Master still hadn't appeared. After another quarter of an hour, loud laughter rang out. Everyone, I'm sorry for the long wait. Following the loud laughter, a hearty voice sounded. Immediately, no one came over, but a figure appeared in the empty seat. The figure seemed to be condensed from water. I heard that our ancient God Sword Alliance has 4 new members. Welcome, welcome. After using this mysterious method to appear, he looked at Chu Mu and the others and smiled. Alliance Master, these 4 new members are not simple. They are the top 10 geniuses on the Heaven Youth Leaderboard, especially Chu Mu, who is ranked first on the Heaven Youth Leaderboard. After joining the Sword Alliance, he has defeated many people with his sword skills. His sword skills are peerless. Xing Liang introduced. Oh, so they are the top 10 geniuses on the Heaven Youth Leaderboard. I've heard of them before, but I didn't have the chance to meet them. Now that I've seen them, they are indeed extraordinary. The Alliance Master's eyes lit up and said, no wonder they are ranked first on the Heaven Youth Leaderboard. They were only at the low-level Nirvana realm back then, but now they are at the early second sky of Aeon. Alliance Master, it is even more difficult to reach the third sky of Aeon. Chu Mu smiled. Haha, it is indeed difficult. Alliance Master Yang Fan said with a smile. Immediately after, he retracted his gaze, as if he was looking at everyone, but at the same time, he didn't seem to be looking at anything. This time, I have obtained quite a lot of information, and one of them is most likely related to the deep blue sacred pearl. Everyone's face turned serious when they heard that. Do you know the origin of the ancient heaven domain? Alliance Master Yang Fan asked. Wasn't the ancient heaven domain created by the ancient heaven Saint Emperor and the 4 Saint Emperors that followed him? A 2-star sword saint asked. That's right, the ancient heaven domain was created by the ancient heaven Saint Emperor and his 4 followers. After it was created, the ancient heaven Saint Emperor went into seclusion because he had used up too much energy. Yang Fan said, a few years ago there was a piece of news. Do you still remember it? Yang Fan seemed to like to ask questions of others. Alliance Master, are you talking about the ancient heaven temple? Yan Zhenkong was very cooperative. That's right, it is the ancient heaven temple that has been the talk of the town for the past few years. Yang Fan smiled. Chu Mu and the other 3 didn't have any strange expressions. When they came to the ancient heaven domain and arrived at the Wind Listening Tower, they received 2 pieces of news. The first was the ancient God Sword Alliance, and the second was the ancient heaven temple. They didn't know where the news came from, but it spread throughout the ancient heaven domain in a short period of time. However, the speed of the news in the outer domain was not as fast as in the ancient heaven domain. It was rumored that the ancient heaven temple was about to appear, and the ancient heaven temple was where the ancient heaven Saint Emperor went into seclusion. It was rumored that the ancient heaven Saint Emperor went into seclusion because he had used up too much energy to create the ancient heaven domain. In the end, he didn't recover and died. The appearance of the ancient Heaven Temple represented an opportunity. Entering it would allow one to obtain the inheritance of the ancient Heaven Saint Emperor. The inheritance of a Saint Emperor. Moreover, the ancient Heaven Saint Emperor wasn't an ordinary Saint Emperor, but a powerful Saint Emperor who had 4 Saint Emperors following him. His inheritance was incomparably attractive. According to the news I received, the ancient Heaven Saint Emperor has the deep blue sacred pearl. Now that the ancient Heaven Temple is about to appear, the deep blue sacred pearl might be left in the ancient Heaven Temple, Yang Fan said. Everyone's eyes lit up when they heard it, and Chu Mu and the other 3 were no exception. Moreover, the ancient Heaven Temple has already appeared. Yang Fan threw out another bombshell. However, there is a large amount of protection outside the ancient Heaven Temple. We can't enter yet. We can only enter after the protection disappears. Alliance leader, since the ancient Heaven Temple has already appeared, let's set off quickly, a 1-star sword saint said. They had to obtain the deep blue sacred pearl. Even if they didn't have the deep blue sacred pearl, who wouldn't want to obtain the inheritance of a powerful Saint Emperor? I came back to prepare to bring everyone to the ancient Heaven Temple, Yang Fan said. Everyone, let's set off now. No one was a procrastinator. Once they finished speaking, they quickly stood up and left Tianxiang City. Outside Tianxiang City, Yang Fan took out a 100-meter-long flying ship. Everyone entered the flying ship. The flying ship started up and rose into the sky. It changed direction and flew away rapidly. Everyone, we are all members of the Ancient God Sword Alliance. There are some things that we should make clear. Vice Alliance leader Xing Liang said. If we enter the Ancient Heaven Temple, whether or not we can obtain the inheritance of the Ancient Heaven Saint Emperor depends on our luck. However, whether it is the deep blue sacred pearl or the inheritance of the ancient Heaven Saint Emperor, it will be extremely difficult. There will definitely be many people entering and there will be many monstrous geniuses. It will be extremely difficult and we will die if we are not careful. Therefore, we have to be united. Vice Alliance leader is right. We come from the same place and we have to be united. This is also the reason why the Alliance leader created the Sword Alliance. The reason why I created the Sword Alliance is to unite everyone and establish a foothold in the deep blue world to complete the mission, Yang Fan said with a smile. Once we enter the ancient Heaven Temple, we will try our best to stay together. Perhaps we will be separated. However, if we encounter each other, we will have to help each other in times of danger. Xing Liang said. Of course, if we encounter the treasure at the same time, we will see who needs to split it more. Such a statement was very reasonable and no one had any objections. Inside the flying ship, everyone was also cultivating while chatting. However, due to the space, they couldn't practice their swordsmanship. They could only cultivate quietly. 20 days later, the flying ship arrived at the border of the ancient Heaven domain. More people are coming. The ancient Heaven Temple is the place where the ancient Heaven Divine Emperor went into seclusion. It's the place of his inheritance. When the news spread, of course, many people would rush over. The inheritance of a powerful Divine Emperor. No one wants to miss it. Yes. In this era where the Divine Emperor doesn't appear, the value of a powerful Divine Emperor's inheritance is indescribable. Below the flying ship, many people had already gathered. Most of them were experts from the ancient Heaven domain, and a small number of them were experts from other regions. Their goal was to enter the ancient Heaven Divine Emperor's ancient Heaven Temple. The attraction was too great. The flying ship landed and Chu Mu and the rest came out. More than 30 people. All of them are low-level martial saints. They are the people from the ancient God Sword Alliance. 39 sword saints. Rumor has it that the members of the ancient God Sword Alliance are all sword saints. It's true. The appearance of the people from the ancient God Sword Alliance caused a commotion. Chu Mu and the rest also realized that there were many people here. Most of them were martial saints, but some of them were Nirvana realm cultivators. After all, this was the place where the ancient Heaven Divine Emperor went into seclusion. It was very likely that his inheritance was there. And the inheritance wasn't something that could be obtained by one's fist. It depended on one's luck. Perhaps a Nirvana realm expert would coincidentally obtain the inheritance. Therefore, they came to try their luck. As long as there was a slight possibility, it was worth taking the risk, even if it was at the cost of one's life. Everyone cherished their own life. However, under some circumstances, they were willing to pay the price as long as they thought it was worth it. Go and fight for that slim chance. If you got it, your fate would change. Even if you couldn't become a divine emperor in the future, you could still become a peerless expert. In this era where the divine emperor didn't appear, a peerless expert was the top combat power. They could create a superclass force. Who wouldn't be tempted? Taking a few steps back, even if they couldn't obtain the inheritance of the ancient Heaven Divine Emperor, as the place where the ancient Heaven Divine Emperor went into seclusion, there must be a lot of treasures. Those treasures were very valuable. If they could obtain it, it would be of great help to them. Among the martial saints who came here, the lowest was a 1-star martial saint. At present, the highest was a 9-star martial saint. Wisps of powerful aura emanated from the bodies of the martial saints. The fluctuations were extremely shocking. At this moment, there was a violent void fluctuation not far away. A pair of white jade-like hands stretched out from the void. They grabbed left and right and tore the void apart as if they were tearing paper. Chapter 1635. The void was torn apart and an incomparably powerful aura seeped out, causing everyone's body to tremble, and they were all incomparably shocked. That pair of white jade-like palms looked crystal clear, as if it was the most beautiful thing in the world, but it caused everyone's eyes to widen and their hearts to tremble. Because that pair of hands seemed to have a magical power, causing one's mind to be unconsciously immersed in it. A ripping sound was heard and the void was torn apart again like a piece of cloth. Behind the white jade-like hands, a figure stepped out, as if there was a void mist lingering around his body. As soon as he appeared, he was indomitable and earth-shattering. A gaze seemed to be able to destroy a world. A wisp of aura was able to suppress mountains and rivers. This feeling was even more intense than when Chu Mu faced Duguchong. In the current era, if a saint emperor did not appear, peerless experts would dominate the world. This person was a peerless expert who was even stronger than Duguchong, a peerless expert who was proficient in the Tao of space. This group of peerless experts in white robes was like a peerless young master, outstanding and unparalleled. Boom! An incomparably loud sound came from the distant horizon. In the blink of an eye, a purple-red lightning streaked across the sky and landed on the ground. A domineering and terrifying aura rushed out in all directions, immediately causing the faces of the saint experts to change drastically, and they were forced to retreat one by one. This was the result of the other party deliberately restraining his aura. Otherwise, under such an impact, most of them would have been injured and vomited blood. Kong Lu, you're even earlier than me. A loud and clear laugh resounded. I cultivate the Tao of space. If I'm slower than you, Lei Ba, wouldn't I be ashamed? Kong Lu smiled and said, That's true. If you're slower than me, you can kill yourself. Lei Ba laughed. His voice buzzed in everyone's ears, causing them to almost lose their hearing. Whether it was Kong Lu, Lei Ba, or Chu Mu, all of them felt that they were stronger than Duguchong, and not just by a little bit. It seemed like there were strong and weak experts among the peerless experts. Let me, Lei Ba, see what's so mysterious about the heavenly ancient divine emperor's place of seclusion. Lei Ba's gaze was like lightning as he swept his gaze forward. An incomparably huge palace stood between the heavens and the earth. It was situated on the earth at the edge of the ancient heavenly domain. Behind it was an endless darkness. The darkness stretched on endlessly with no end in sight. Spiritual power would be absorbed and devoured as soon as it touched the darkness. This was a forbidden area in the ancient heaven domain. It was called the dark nothingness. If a saint expert entered, they would die without a doubt. Only peerless experts could enter and come out alive. However, it was said that there were no treasures in the dark nothingness. There was only a dark nothingness. Without treasures, there was no way to attract cultivators. If the heavenly ancient sacred hall was in the dark void forbidden land, it would be a headache. As time passed, more and more people arrived. Nirvana realm cultivators were in the minority, and most of them were in the eternal realm. Apart from the original Kong Lu and Lei Ba, there were a dozen more. More than 10 peerless experts stood in the crowd like cranes among chickens. They stood alone and became the center of attention. The heavenly ancient sacred hall became clearer and clearer, and the powerful seals outside disappeared layer by layer. In the end, there was only one layer of seal left. After a few more days, there were no changes to this layer of seal. It seemed that this was the end. A peerless expert took a step forward and crossed a few thousand meters in an instant. He appeared in front of the last seal of the heavenly ancient sacred hall. He did not recklessly barge in. Instead, he stretched out his palm and gently placed it on the seal, gradually increasing his strength. Layers of ripples spread out on the seal, but the seal did not break. One by one, the peerless experts took action. They used all sorts of methods, but they could not break the seal. They could not enter. Even the peerless experts cannot enter. How can we enter? That's hard to say. Many treasured lands have cultivation restrictions. We might be able to enter. More than 10 peerless experts retreated. They could not do anything. Suddenly, one of the peerless experts reached out and grabbed the saint who had just spoken. This saint was a 5-star saint, but he couldn't resist at all. He was like a rag doll in front of a peerless expert's grasp. With a casual toss, the saint expert flew towards the seal. He crashed into the seal at an extremely fast speed. With a bang, a terrifying force burst out from the seal, causing the saint body of the 5-star saint expert to shatter. Blood splattered, and only his primordial spirit was left. Damn it, you! The sudden turn of events infuriated the 5-star martial saint. He had lost his rationality and was completely unable to discern the situation. Just as he was about to open his mouth and curse, a ferocious wave of energy suddenly swept out and destroyed his primordial spirit. Ant, the ferocious peerless expert, snorted coldly, his voice full of disdain. Such a scene made the other saint experts fearful. They retreated far away. But in reality, there was not much difference between 100 meters and 10,000 meters to the peerless expert. Do you want to go by yourself, or do you want me to send you there? The ferocious peerless expert looked at the other saint expert who had spoken. This person was a 3-star saint. The 3-star saint expert felt as if his primordial spirit had been struck by lightning when the ferocious peerless expert looked at him. His body went soft and he almost fell to the ground. Trash! The ferocious peerless expert was called Zhengli. He reached out again and grabbed the limp 3-star saint expert. He threw him out casually. In an instant, the 3-star saint expert's body came into contact with the seal. With a bang, the 3-star saint expert's saint body was also struck by a force and shattered, leaving only his primordial spirit behind. This person did not curse out loud. Instead, he drove his primordial spirit away from the seal. But Zhengli waved his hand again and destroyed his primordial spirit. Such ferocity and viciousness was even more shocking. You go over there. Lei Ba suddenly opened his mouth and pointed at a 1-star saint. The 1-star saint expert trembled all over. He walked toward the seal with fear and trepidation. When he got close, he slowly stretched out his right hand and gritted his teeth. His eyes were fixed on the seal, and he was trembling all over. The miserable state of the 4-star saint and 3-star saint experts was still replaying in his mind. He did not want to go, but he had no choice. Otherwise, the peerless expert could crush him with a finger. Torment, hesitation, struggle. Every second felt like a year. Everyone stared at him as cold sweat drenched his body. Finally, his palm came into contact with the seal. There was no counterattack. His palm even went through the seal. What's going on? Everyone narrowed their eyes. He was extremely shocked. Just as he was about to barge in, he was repelled by a force. He spat out blood and landed a few hundred meters away. What's going on? How can this be? Many people were puzzled, but there were still some who could see the mystery behind it. Zhengli did not say anything. He appeared in front of the seal again. When he moved, the other peerless experts also moved and appeared in front of the seal. They stretched out their palms and gently touched the seal. They did not seem to be obstructed like before. They directly passed through the seal. Then, their bodies also passed through the seal and entered the seal. In front of them was the huge and majestic heavenly ancient sacred hall. However, a strange expression flashed across their faces. There was no joy after passing through the seal. Instead, there was some confusion and some vague panic. Yes, Chu Mu was sure that he did not see wrongly. Even though it was just a flash, he did catch a glimpse of a vague panic on the faces of those peerless experts. What exactly was it that made these peerless experts feel so terrified? Chu Mu did not know, but he paid attention. At the same time, he also knew how to pass through the seal. Everyone, I don't know if you noticed. Alliance Master Yang Fan's voice rang in the ears of everyone in the Ancient God Sword Alliance. To pass through the seal, you need to do one thing. You can't use too much power. You can only use the smallest amount of power. It's like turning yourself into an ordinary person to pass through the seal. Hearing Yang Fan's words, Chu Mu's expression did not change. However, many people's eyes lit up because they did not notice this. Apart from Yang Fan, Chu Mu and the others, there were naturally others who noticed this. Some of them told their friends, while others went forward alone. Chu Mu and the others immediately went forward and came before the seal. After restraining their power, they approached the seal. In an instant, everyone was on high alert because they were not sure. The moment their bodies came into contact with the seal, they felt as if they were about to dive into water. Layers of ripples spread out and they passed through the seal without any obstruction. I'm in. A few of them could not help but cheer. I see. This is the right method. Outside the seal, the people who were carefully observing could not help but laugh. Then, they passed through the seal and entered the heavenly ancient sacred hall. A strange look flashed across Chu Mu's eyes, but he quickly returned to normal. After passing through the seal and entering the heavenly ancient sacred hall, Chu Mu immediately felt an invisible force suppressing him, weakening his primordial spirit. His primordial spirit, which was originally at the beginning of the 4th level, was now at the peak of the 3rd level. Chu Mu roughly understood the panic that flashed across the faces of the top experts. Their primordial spirits were at least at the 7th level. If they were in the same situation as him, they would definitely feel uneasy when their primordial spirits were weakened from the 7th level to the peak of the 3rd level. Then, Chu Mu also noticed that the auras of the top experts seemed to be abnormal. They seemed to have weakened by many times. It seemed to be similar to a 3-star saint. After making some guesses, Chu Mu looked at the others. He scanned the top and middle level saints one by one. After that, Chu Mu came to a conclusion. Those below the immemorial realm were unable to pass through the seal because the Nirvana realm experts were blocked outside. After passing through the seal, everyone's primordial spirit and strength would be restricted. They would be suppressed below the 4th level of the primordial spirit and below the 4-star saint level. The highest they could reach was the peak of the 3rd level of the primordial spirit and the peak of the 3-star saint level. Chapter 1636. More and more people discovered the secret of the seal and passed through the seal. Not far away was the heavenly ancient sacred hall. What's going on? My cultivation, my primordial spirit, how could it? The mid-level and high-level martial saints all realized that their primordial spirits and cultivation bases were being suppressed. Many of them panicked. It wasn't easy to raise one's cultivation. The cultivation of the primordial spirit was even more difficult. Being suppressed all of a sudden, they naturally felt uneasy and panicked. However, they soon discovered that they weren't the only ones being suppressed. The others were also being suppressed. Even the dozen or so peerless experts were being suppressed. This situation allowed them to immediately relax. The faces of the dozen or so peerless experts were rather ugly. Originally, they were so powerful. Now, their primordial spirits, which were at least level 7, were being suppressed to the peak of level 3. Their cultivation was also being suppressed to the peak of level 3. This feeling was really unpleasant. Apart from the Nirvana realm experts, everyone else had entered the seal. Ha 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 ha! Suddenly, a vigorous laughter rang out. It seemed to come from all directions. Everyone immediately turned their heads to look for it. Their spiritual energy spread out and swept around. However, they didn't find anything. The voice rang out again. Hello everyone. Don't waste your energy. You won't be able to find me. Who are you? Someone asked loudly. Good question. I am the heavenly ancient sacred emperor. The vigorous voice rang out. Instantly, countless people were shocked. Heavenly ancient sacred emperor. Didn't they say that the heavenly ancient sacred emperor had already fallen and left his inheritance to wait for the fated person? What was going on now? The Holy Spirit of the heavenly ancient sacred temple. The voice seemed to be deliberately teasing everyone. After a pause, it continued, causing many people to heave a sigh of relief. However, the dozen or so peerless experts did not heave a sigh of relief. Instead, their eyes flashed with a bright light, as though they were happy. The heavenly ancient sacred hall's sacred spirit meant that the heavenly ancient sacred hall had a spirit. Perhaps most people didn't understand what this meant. However, as peerless experts, they stood at different heights and knew different things. A sword suitable for a sword saint was called a spiritual sword. Only a spiritual sword could fully unleash the strength of a sword saint. Could it be that other than a sword saint, other cultivators didn't have a suitable weapon? No, there were weapons similar to spirit swords. However, just like spirit swords, they were very rare. Spirit swords and other similar weapons were collectively known as spirit-grade treasures. They were weapons and treasures suitable for saint-grade experts. According to the classification, spirit-level treasures could be divided into 4 grades: low, middle, and high. Almost all the peerless experts could only use upper-grade spirit-level treasures. Top-grade spirit-level treasures were almost an extravagant hope. Regardless of whether it was a high-grade spiritual treasure or a supreme-grade spiritual treasure, they all had spirituality. The only difference was the strength of the spirituality, which brought about the difference in power. Above the spirit-grade treasures, there was an even higher level of treasures. These treasures had already broken away from the spirit grade and had undergone a qualitative change. They had gone from having spirituality to having true intelligence. Intelligence was something that only intelligent creatures possessed. When a treasure gained intelligence, it was as if it had become a spirit. Regardless of whether it was its power or other aspects, it would experience a huge leap. There was a huge gap between it and the vast majority of spirit-grade treasures. Treasures of this level had a name in the deep blue world. They were called Saint Emperor grade treasures. As the name implied, they were treasures that only Saint Emperors were qualified to possess. Another meaning was that among the treasures that had gained intelligence had a status similar to Saint Emperors among cultivators. It was because of this that the peerless experts were so happy. If they could possess the heavenly ancient sacred hall, it would be equivalent to possessing a Saint Emperor grade treasure. With a Saint Emperor grade treasure, other than having a huge increase in strength, they could also comprehend the treasure and comprehend the path to becoming a Saint Emperor. No matter what, even if they couldn't obtain the inheritance of the heavenly ancient sacred emperor, they had to obtain this Saint Emperor grade treasure and the heavenly ancient sacred hall. Of course, it would be even better if they could obtain all of it. From now on, only those who can reach the sacred hall within the time it takes for an incense stick to burn will be qualified to enter the sacred hall. The sacred spirit's voice rang out once again, interrupting everyone's thoughts and causing them to be stunned. Wasn't the sacred hall right in front of them? It was only a few hundred meters away. Why would they need an incense stick's worth of time? While everyone was thinking, an incense stick fell from the sky. That incense stick was about half a meter long. Shortly after, a strange scene appeared. The heavenly ancient sacred hall that was only a few hundred meters away seemed to have come alive. It rapidly moved backwards. In the blink of an eye, it was thousands of meters away, tens of thousands of meters away, and it was still moving backwards. When it was 100,000 meters away, the heavenly ancient sacred hall became a small building in everyone's eyes. Following that, the ground within 100,000 meters caved in, leaving behind a floating disk of earth. Below, it was pitch black and endless, causing people to feel a chill in their hearts. Everyone finally understood. In an incense stick's worth of time, they had crossed a distance of 100,000 meters and arrived at the heavenly ancient sacred hall. 100,000 meters was a distance of 200 li. Even if it was a straight road, it was indeed a very long distance for an ordinary person. If one didn't consider the exhaustion of running, it would take at least 4 hours. If one walked, it would take at least 14 to 16 hours. As for the incense stick's worth of time, it was probably less than a quarter of an hour. Moreover, this 100,000 meters wasn't a straight road, but a disk. Some of the disks were bigger, while some were smaller. Some were closer, while some were farther. Ordinary people wouldn't be able to cross it. However, this was nothing to cultivators who could fly. If they flew directly, even a one-star saint could easily cross a distance of 100,000 meters in an incense stick's worth of time. How could it be so simple? Take note. You can't fly here. If you fall, you will enter the forbidden land of nothingness. Whether you live or die will depend on your own fortune. The heavenly ancient sacred hall's saint spirit spoke again. When everyone heard his voice, they felt a sense of schadenfreude. In addition, there are more interesting things waiting for you to discover. Now, let's begin. As soon as the voice sounded, the incense stick automatically ignited. White smoke rose in spirals, and a fragrance assailed everyone's nostrils. Immediately, everyone's mind was shaken, and they felt more awake. The incense stick had already started to burn. According to the speed at which it was burning, it would take close to a quarter of an hour. It seemed quite long, but no one knew what mysteries those discs had. As peerless cultivators, even if their primordial spirits and cultivation were restricted, they were still very confident because everyone was restricted. If they were at the same cultivation level, they would definitely be the strongest. More than a dozen peerless experts took the lead. They leaped and displayed their movement techniques, landing on the discs one by one. The moment they landed on the discs, a change occurred. The discs actually started to move like floating ice on a stream. They moved at a uniform speed from left to right. The dozen or so peerless experts glanced at each other and immediately came to a decision. They leapt down again, landing on their respective second round plates and advancing. The other saints began to move as well, choosing the best round plate as their foothold. They leaped up and landed on the round plate. The moment they leaped up, they felt as if their bodies were bound. They could not fly at all, even if they were peerless masters. Chumu landed on a disc. As the disc moved, he stared at another disc. He leaped and landed on the second disc. The discs continued to move at a uniform speed. It wasn't fast, but it wasn't easy either. They had to pay attention. Looking from afar, on 100,000 meters wide, countless discs were moving like lotus leaves. Figures were leaping forward like frogs. Other than the dozen peerless experts, there were close to 10,000 saints. Leaping forward. Soon, everyone jumped on the discs and continued to move forward. The dozen peerless experts were far ahead. They belonged to the first line, and were hundreds of meters ahead of the second line. Don't underestimate those hundreds of meters. Perhaps on land it would only take an instant. But in this place, it wasn't easy to travel hundreds of meters. Everyone was paying full attention. There were hundreds of people in the second line, and they were more than 100 meters ahead of the third line. The third line had more than 2,000 people, and they were more than 10 meters ahead of the fourth line. The fourth line was the last line and had the most people. Chu-Mu and the others were in the fourth line. I'm going to speed up. Be careful, Xing Liang said. His speed suddenly increased. Soon, he passed through the fourth line, entered the third line, and quickly approached the second line. As the leader of the alliance, Yang Fan had already rushed to the second line. You can play here slowly. Yan Zhengkong leaped past Chu-Mu, leaving Chu-Mu a sentence. He took the lead and quickly rushed to the third line. At this time, the fourth line at the back had also advanced more than 1,000 meters, and the first line had advanced more than 3,000 meters. Below, there was darkness like an abyss. That was the dark void forbidden land. It was said that after the ancient heaven domain was opened, the dark void forbidden land had been there, and it had swallowed countless lives. Legend had it that only peerless experts could leave the dark void forbidden land alive. No one was willing to fall into it, not even the dozen peerless experts. Although it was said that peerless experts could enter the dark void forbidden land and leave alive, no one knew what kind of dangers they would encounter. No one could be sure. What if there was an accident? In a situation where there were no benefits, no one was willing to be involved. However, if you avoided the danger, it didn't mean that the danger wouldn't appear and find you. Ah! A shrill scream filled with panic was like a sharp sword that tore through the sky, making everyone's heart tremble. Chapter 1637. The blood-curdling screams were like swords that pierced into the hearts of the crowd. Even the dozens of peerless experts who were far ahead could not help but look back. They saw a figure falling rapidly. The blood-curdling screams were constantly coming from that figure, and they were getting weaker and weaker. After a few breaths, that figure fell into the endless darkness of the abyss and disappeared. It was as if he had been swallowed by the darkness. Only the blood-curdling screams were still lingering in the ears of the crowd. The first one. This was the first person to fall. One had to pay a price in order to gain something. That was the truth. Therefore, if one wanted to obtain the right to enter the heavenly ancient sacred hall, one had to be prepared to pay the price of one's life. However, everything went smoothly from the beginning, and there were no problems. It was inevitable that some people would let their guard down, thinking that the difficulty was to cross the 100,000 meters in the time it took for a joss stick to burn. Since one could not fly, they had to jump and move forward. They also had to pay attention to the movement of the disc. Naturally, they had to spend more time and energy. Whether they could cross the distance in the time it took for a joss stick to burn was a difficult question. The first death had occurred. At the very least, everyone knew that if a mid-level martial saint fell into the forbidden land of the void, death was the only outcome. Moreover, they would not die immediately, but gradually die in the void of darkness. That kind of death was terrifying. However, the crowd were all strong-willed people. After being stunned for a moment, they quickly recovered. What they were more concerned about was why that person had fallen. Just as they were pondering, a second scream was heard. This time, the crowd discovered it earlier. They saw the discs under that person's feet shatter into pieces. Then, a third scream was heard. The fourth, the fifth, more than 10 discs shattered in succession. The people on them were unable to fly in the air. Without any support, they could only fall downwards. Among them, a few of the more outstanding ones reacted quickly and quickly adjusted their balance. They wanted to use their movement techniques to ascend and leap towards the other disc. However, they were helplessly falling too quickly. Although their reactions were fast, they were still a bit too slow. They could only helplessly fall. What is going on? Not knowing the situation made people feel uneasy. Suddenly, Chu-Mu felt that the discs under his feet seemed to be unstable. He quickly jumped up. The moment he jumped, the discs under his feet shattered into pieces. Just a little bit, just a little bit. If he had been a little bit slower, he would have lost the opportunity to borrow the force. At that time, without any preparation, it was very likely that he would fall into the dark void like the previous dozen people. Although Chu-Mu was startled as he leaped into the air, he did not lose his composure. He executed his movement technique and took several steps in the air. Amid the sound of wind and thunder, he quickly headed for a moving disc in front of him and landed. Chu-Mu was not the only one who encountered this. Dozens of other people also encountered the same situation. Some of them reacted quickly and used their movement techniques to move forward or to the side. However, some of them did not react in time and fell. From this point alone, one could see the difference between different saint-level experts. This was the difference between their survivability. Powerful people might not necessarily have a strong ability to survive. After this sudden change, everyone realized that the disc under their feet was not stable. It was possible that it would shatter. As for which disc would shatter, it would depend entirely on one's luck. All of a sudden, everyone paid more attention to the disc under their feet. Once there was any abnormal movement, they would immediately leap up. This made everyone nervous. A peerless expert was indeed a peerless expert. Even if the disc under his feet was shattered, he could still quickly adjust himself and use all kinds of methods to land on other discs. Due to the instability of the disc, the difference between the four lines of battle was further widened. Especially the dozen exceptional experts in the first line of battle, they were more than 1,000 meters ahead of the second line of battle. According to the Holy Spirit, there might be other changes. Everyone be careful. Chu-Mu transmitted his voice to Gu Luankong and the other two. They were all in the fourth line of battle and their speed was not that fast. However, if they maintained their current speed, they could definitely cross the chasm and reach the heavenly ancient sacred hall in 30 minutes. The premise was that there were no other changes. After a third of the time, the first line of battle had already reached a distance of 45,000 meters. The fourth line of battle was at the back, less than 40,000 meters. What was reassuring was that other than the unstable disc shattering, there were no other accidents. As for the instability of the disc, after many times, some of them had found some patterns. The first condition for the disc to shatter was to stand on it for more than 10 breaths of time. The second rule was harder to grasp. Before the disc shattered, there would be a slight vibration. If one was careful, one could usually escape before the disc completely shattered. No one dared to let down their guard. All of them were fully focused and their mental strength was constantly depleted. At 70,000 meters, the dozen exceptional experts in the first line of battle suddenly changed their previous fast speed. They stopped and stared ahead. The disc that was originally flowing at a uniform speed suddenly changed. The speed of the disc became fast and slow. Some of it was very slow, drifting past slowly. Some of it was very fast, catching up from behind and passing by quickly. The eyes of the exceptional experts shone brightly. They were constantly calculating and thinking about the best way forward. The second line of battle continued to catch up. The distance between them was getting shorter and shorter. Their luck wasn't bad. The disc didn't shatter. After a few dozen breaths of time, when the second line of battle was closing in, the exceptional experts moved once more. With a step, they would either turn into a bolt of lightning or a gust of wind. Sometimes they would flash and appear on the discs in front of them. Then, they would stop again and continue to think. The discs in front of them were moving at different speeds. Furthermore, there didn't seem to be any pattern. They had to constantly calculate before daring to land. Otherwise, if they made a mistake, the consequences would be severe. The incense stick continued to burn. When it was almost halfway done, the second line of defense had also reached 70,000 meters. There were only 30,000 meters left. The peerless experts from the first line of defense had taken the lead, so they knew that there was definitely a change here. Therefore, they all stopped and observed. In front of them, the speed of the disc was different, and it seemed to be somewhat chaotic. It interfered with their thoughts and judgment. 10 breaths passed, and more than 10 discs shattered. At the moment they shattered, these people could feel it. Left with no choice, they could only leap forward and choose a random disc as their foothold. These dozen or so people were obviously not very lucky. Some of the discs that they landed on suddenly shattered after a breath's time, while others suddenly sped up after a pause. This sudden change shocked them greatly, and they quickly reacted by jumping up. 3 of them didn't land on anything. They could only stay in the air for a few breaths of time before falling down. They naturally fell into the void of darkness. Whether they lived or died was up to fate. 5 others landed on the discs that were moving at high speed. They were too fast and couldn't judge where they would land. They could only be carried further and further away by the disc. As for the others, their luck was better. The speed of the disc they landed on did not change much. However, their previous judgment was disrupted. Facing the disc that was moving irregularly in front of them, they had to reconsider and make a new judgment. Not long after, the third line of battle also arrived. After that, the fourth line of battle also arrived. When the fourth line of battle arrived, they were surprised to find that the discs weren't shattering anymore. The second line of battle, the third line of battle, and the fourth line of battle were all mixed together. Everyone was thinking, trying to determine how best to advance. The first line of battle had already advanced a few hundred meters. Every time they advanced, they would pause for a few breaths of time. At most, they would pause for 10 breaths of time. They weren't as calm as before. Even so, they were still ahead of the others. Half of the second line of battle had already advanced. However, their speed was even slower. It's so chaotic. Lien Hongyan frowned and stared at the discs in front of her. There's no pattern. Yang Zhantian frowned as well. Gulwankong and Chu Mu didn't say anything. They were just staring at the disc. Their minds were spinning rapidly as they tried to find a pattern. The leader of the ancient god Sword Alliance, Yang Fan, had been in the second line of battle. Now, he was also in the second line of battle. He was standing on a disc a few dozen meters away. He was moving along with the discs as he stared at the discs in front of him, looking for the next landing point. Among the members of the ancient god Sword Alliance, Yang Fan was in the lead. Following him was Xing Liang. It had to be said that they were really capable. After this period, you will reach the heavenly ancient sacred hall. If you are not confident, you can stay where you are until an incense stick burns out. There will be no more danger. The sacred spirit's vigorous voice sounded once again. Some people were unwilling. However, so what? If they weren't confident, they would be courting death. Without danger, the discs stopped moving. This gave everyone enough time to think. However, time was limited. They only had the time for an incense to burn. No, there was only half an incense left. In the previous half an incense, they had crossed 70,000 meters. In the remaining half an incense, they had to cross 30,000 meters. The difficulty of this 30,000 meters was much higher than the 70,000 meters before. At least half of them would be stopped here. However, there were still people who didn't give up and wanted to try. Suddenly, the discs accelerated and moved at an extremely fast speed. They brought the people on them and flew far away. The scene in front of them was so fast that it was impossible to capture it. In the blink of an eye, they were brought away. In the eyes of the crowd, they became small black dots. They disappeared again. Where would they go? Would they fall into the forbidden land of the void? Perhaps only they and the Holy Spirit of the heavenly ancient sacred hall knew. Chapter 1638. As he stared, Chu Mu's eyes unconsciously narrowed before gradually closing. Although he could not see anything in front of him with his eyes closed, The movement of the discs was clearly displayed in his mind, in his mental world. This was an extremely strange feeling. It was as if everything in front of him was within his grasp. He did not use his eyes to see, but he used his heart to see, feel, and grasp. The movement of each disc was either fast, slow, or suddenly accelerated. There was a pattern to the movement of each person. Chu Mu's mind worked rapidly as the power of his soul constantly drained away. In his mental world, he carried out simulations and deductions. It could be said that everyone used a similar method, except that some people were more impressive, while others were more ordinary. Without a doubt, Chu Mu possessed a unique advantage when it came to deductions. His powerful soul gave him extraordinary calculation abilities. At that moment, Chu Mu had cast aside all his emotions as a living being, as well as all the distracting thoughts that affected his calculations. He was completely focused. The choice of the first disc, the second disc, the third disc. Chu Mu's plan was different from everyone else's. Everyone else would choose a disc to advance on first before choosing a second one, a third one, and a third one. They would pause after each disc, which would waste more time and make it more likely that they would make a mistake. However, Chu Mu used his advantage, his great deduction and calculation abilities, to forcefully calculate where the discs would land one by one. Every disc moved at a different speed, and even their trajectories were slightly different. Under these circumstances, it was impossible for Chu Mu to calculate the thousands of discs within 30,000 meters even if his mind was several times stronger. As a result, he made a choice. The power of his soul permeated the surroundings, replacing his eyes. He only calculated the speed and trajectories of the 100 discs up ahead to find the best place to land. Not long after, Chu Mu finished calculating, but his eyes didn't open. His body jumped out and landed on the first disc. The moment he landed on the first disc, Chu Mu didn't stop at all. He lightly tapped the disc with the tip of his foot and, with shocking reaction and speed, he leapt forward towards the second disc. Then, with a light tap of his foot, he leapt towards the third disc. Everyone revealed shocked expressions as they stared at Chu Mu's rapidly leaping figure. The fifth disc, the sixth disc, the seventh disc. Chu Mu leaped forward. His advancing speed didn't stop at all. It was extremely shocking. Very quickly, he caught up to the second battle line. "It's him!" Xing Liang exclaimed. "How can he be so fast?" Yang Fan was also shocked. Then, Chu Mu overtook the second line of defense and rushed toward the first line. "Impossible!" Yan Jinkong said, unable to believe what he was seeing. Many people did not dare to believe it. In their eyes, Chu Mu was only at the early second sky of the Wangu realm. How could he be so powerful? Chu Mu did not know about the exclamations and doubts of others. Even if he knew, he would not care. At this time, his primordial spirit was constantly depleting. His powerful calculation ability was operating, and he had already calculated more than 100 discs. 101 discs. 102 discs. 103 discs. At this time, more than 10 peerless experts in the first line of defense had only advanced a few dozen discs. When they heard the exclamations behind them, they did not turn back to look because they had to focus on calculating the discs in front of them to find the best place to land. The place to land was very important and could not be chosen casually. Once they made the wrong choice, it would affect the choice of the next place to land. They would be taken further and further away from the heavenly ancient sacred hall. If they could not reach it in the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, they would lose the right to enter the heavenly ancient sacred hall. With his eyes closed, Chu Mu rapidly closed the distance between him and the peerless experts in the first line of defense. In the blink of an eye, Chu Mu had already leaped over more than a dozen discs. Moreover, his speed did not show any signs of slowing down. He was still advancing rapidly. How did he know? Many people were puzzled. They did not believe that someone's calculation ability could be so powerful. He will definitely make a mistake. Some people were secretly jealous, hoping to see Chu Mu make a mistake. However, they did not see it. Chu Mu leaped forward and landed. With a light tap of his foot, the disk's speed suddenly increased by more than 10 times. Chu Mu was almost affected by the disk and deviated from the calculated path. However, he was not affected at all. He still maintained absolute calmness, without any distracting thoughts or emotional fluctuations. More than a dozen peerless experts felt a weak aura rapidly approaching. They could not help but turn back to take a look. When they saw Chu Mu rapidly approaching, they were immediately shocked. A 2-star beginner's ascension. His cultivation was not suppressed by the heavenly ancient sacred hall. His cultivation was already at that level, yet he was able to catch up with them. In their eyes, Chu Mu did not stop at all. Moreover, his eyes were still closed. In the blink of an eye, Chu Mu had caught up with more than a dozen peerless experts in the first line of defense. Soon after, he did not stop and leaped forward again. He overtook more than a dozen peerless experts and became the first line of defense. The first line of defense naturally became the second line of defense. The faces of more than a dozen peerless experts turned ugly. Who were they? They were peerless experts, a small group of people who stood at the top of the world. They had unparalleled strength and supreme status. A mere 2-star martial saint was no different from an ant in their eyes. But now, an insignificant ant in their eyes had actually caught up to them and even surpassed them. This was something that was almost impossible to happen. However, it was happening right before their eyes. How is this possible? Jing Li's face was gloomy. His eyes were filled with murderous intent as he stared at Chu Mu's back. This caused Chu Mu to feel a chill invading his body. He had almost ruined the state of deduction. Die! Jing Li attacked without hesitation. A mere 2-star martial saint ant could be killed at will. There was no need to think too much about it. An extremely terrifying attack instantly blasted out. However, before it could hit Chu Mu, it dissipated into nothingness. Don't think about attacking others. Quickly think of a way to cross this natural chasm and reach the heavenly ancient sacred hall in half an hour. The vigorous voice seemed to be mocking Jing Li. This caused Jing Li's murderous intent to spread out. However, there was nothing he could do. Chu Mu remained calm and unaffected by the outside world. His speed did not change as he quickly widened the distance between him and the peerless expert. Chu Mu became the first line of defense by himself as he advanced rapidly. The distance between him and the peerless experts widened. Interesting, Kong Lu muttered to himself. What's the origin of this ant? He actually has such ability? Lei Ba said. However, no one replied to him. Time was limited and there was no time to waste. They continued to calculate. As expected of an exceptional expert, his knowledge and experience were plentiful, and his ability to deduce far surpassed others. After seeing Chu Mu's path of advancement, he quickly obtained inspiration from it and immediately saw the next best place to stop. Advance. Chu Mu advanced alone. While he was ahead of the others, he also gave the peerless experts a better opportunity to observe and calculate. This caused their advancing speed to increase significantly. Even so, the distance between them and Chu Mu did not decrease. Instead, it increased. Before long, Chu Mu had crossed over 100 discs. He had also calculated dozens of discs behind him. Without stopping, he continued to advance and calculate. Under such a state of calculation, the power of the primordial spirit was being consumed at an alarming rate. Fortunately, Chu Mu's primordial spirit was at the peak of grade 3. However, because his soul was stronger than an ordinary person's, his peak grade 3 primordial spirit's power of the primordial spirit was very close to an early grade 4 primordial spirit's power. In addition to the 30% increase in the power of the primordial spirit from the black gold mask, his primordial spirit could reach the strength of an early grade 4 primordial spirit. Under such circumstances, The recovery speed of Chu Mu's primordial spirit could not keep up with the speed of his consumption. It could be seen how shocking the consumption of his primordial spirit's power was. In the eyes of the crowd, Chu Mu continued to move further and further away, far ahead of the others. More than half of the incense stick had already burned. There was only a small half left, almost a third. At this moment, Chu Mu was only a few thousand meters away from the other side of the moat. With his current speed, he could reach the other side before the incense stick burned out and obtain the qualifications to enter the heavenly ancient sacred hall. Chu Mu did not care if he could obtain the inheritance of the heavenly ancient sacred emperor. What he wanted the most was the deep blue divine pearl, if the heavenly ancient sacred hall really had the deep blue divine pearl. Of course, if he could obtain the inheritance of the heavenly ancient sacred emperor, Chu Mu would not reject it. With his eyes closed, Chu Mu, who was far ahead, could already feel the land on the other side. With a tap of his foot, he exerted his strength and leaped into the air like a swallow. He quickly flew forward and landed on the ground. Chu Mu was the first to cross the 100,000-meter moat and arrive outside the heavenly ancient sacred hall. The moment he landed, Chu Mu opened his eyes and stopped his calculations. His eyes were filled with exhaustion. The power of his primordial spirit had almost been completely depleted. He looked back and saw that the nearest dozen or so experts were still a few thousand meters away from him. He hurriedly sat down cross-legged and circulated the primordial spirit cultivation technique to speed up the recovery of his primordial spirit. With the two-pronged approach, Chu Mu felt his nearly depleted primordial spirit begin to recover a little. Young man, congratulations on being the first to pass through the heavenly moat. Thus you have obtained an additional chance at the lottery. The heavenly ancient sacred temple's Holy Spirit's voice rang out in Chu Mu's ears, causing him to be extremely surprised. An additional chance at the lottery? Chapter 1639. On the other side, a stick of incense burned and the last ashes fell. When the time was up, all the discs suddenly stopped moving. Then, they quickly retreated back to where they came from. You have been eliminated, the sacred shrine spirit said. This is not fair. Those who did not pass the 100,000 meters in the time of incense shouted. When my master was alive, he was an expert in the Tao of divination. Naturally, the successor must have exceptional divination abilities, the sacred shrine spirit explained simply. This test is to test your divination abilities. It has nothing to do with your strength. If your divination abilities are not up to standard, leave quickly. Otherwise, I will not be polite. The last words of the sacred spirit were extremely cold and contained a trace of murderous intent. No matter how unwilling they were, these people could not continue to stay. They could only turn and leave. They looked at the few people on the other side with envy and jealousy. Outside the sky ancient sacred shrine, there were 100 people. Coincidentally, there were 100 people. In other words, there were only 100 people who had passed through the 100,000 meters of natural chasm in the time it took for an incense stick to burn. He was one of them and also the first to pass. Apart from him, there were 14 peerless experts. As for the last ones, most of them were high-level saints, a few were mid-level saints, and even fewer were low-level saints. Gu Luankong, Yang Zhantian, and Lien Hongyun did not pass. Their performance was not bad, because they all had monstrous talent. However, their levels were too low, which limited them. They did not have an exceptional soul like Chu Mu. In the end, they were 10,000 meters behind and could not move forward. As for the other people of the ancient God Sword Alliance, the leader Yang Fan and the deputy leader Xing Liang were in the lead. Xing Liang was only a few thousand meters behind, while Yang Fan passed the moment the incense burned out. It was very dangerous. Of the 30 people of the ancient God Sword Alliance, only Chu Mu and Yang Fan passed. Junior, what is your name? Zhengli walked over with large strides. His expression was extremely cold, and killing intent suffused the depths of his eyes. It was like a whirlpool that could shatter one's mind. If it was anyone else who was stared at by Zhengli like this, they would definitely panic and tremble. However, Chu Mu did not. His will was far superior to others. Furthermore, Zheng Li's yuan spirit and cultivation had been suppressed, so the deterrent force of his gaze had been greatly reduced. He was unable to affect Chu Mu at all. Chu Mu replied in a calm tone. This wasn't out of everyone's expectations. After all, between a 2-star martial saint and a peerless expert, it was obvious who was stronger. Unless one had a screw loose in his head, he wouldn't deliberately go against a peerless expert. Especially a peerless expert who killed without batting an eyelid. If it was the old Chu Mu, he might not have answered Zheng Li's question. Instead, he might have asked, "Why should I tell you?" or something like that. However, having comprehended a deeper level of the sword, he knew that the sword was not unbending. An appropriate bending would make the sword's counterattack more powerful. Furthermore, he was the master of the true sword sect. If he went against Zhengli, such a vicious person would most likely target the true sword sect and bring unnecessary trouble to the true sword sect. In Chu Mu's perception, this Zhengli's strength was even stronger than Duguchang's. Although the current true sword sect had the protection of the Azure Water Empire, it was still an external force. It could be borrowed, but it couldn't be borrowed often. The strong had to be strong. Not bad. I'm beginning to be interested in you, Aunt. Zhengli smiled viciously. Remember, don't be in a hurry to leave after leaving the sacred hall. Otherwise, no matter where you are, no matter who your backer is, I will find you. Chu Mu only looked at Zhengli and did not reply. Zhengli did not say anything else. His gaze moved away from Chu Mu's face and looked at the majestic sky ancient sacred hall not far away. Looking at the sacred hall at such a close distance gave Chu Mu and the others a strong visual impact. It was vigorous and majestic, like an immemorial mountain standing on the ground. It made everyone who stood before it feel insignificant. Even though there were more than 10 peerless cultivators, they still felt small and insignificant. It was a rare feeling for them, but it still made them excited. As expected, only a holy emperor-level treasure could give them such a feeling. Because a saint emperor-level treasure was comparable to a saint emperor to a certain extent. How did you provoke him? Yang Fan walked to Chu Mu's side and transmitted his voice. Maybe it's because I'm the first to pass, replied Chu Mu. Be careful from now on, Yang Fan said. You too, Chu Mu replied. They did not pay much attention to their conversation, because they were both looking at the sacred hall. First, I would like to congratulate everyone. The sacred spirit's vigorous voice sounded again. You have obtained the qualifications to enter the sacred hall, but the inheritance left behind by my master can only be obtained by one of you. So, who among the 100 of you can obtain the inheritance? This sentence immediately made everyone's heart burn. They had all come for the inheritance of the sky ancient sacred emperor. Next, I will explain the rules. Take note, I will only say it once, the sacred spirit said. The sacred spirit said, after entering the divine temple, you will become opponents, and each of you will receive some points. I will randomly pick 2 of you to fight against each other. The winner will receive the opponent's points, and the loser will have to depend on your luck. Those who are still alive will be sent out of the divine temple. Remember, you can admit defeat. In addition, let me remind you that once you have 10 points, you can draw a prize. The prize is one of the many treasures left behind by my master. What you can draw depends entirely on your luck. What you get depends on. Hearing the sacred spirit's words, everyone was stunned. Draw a prize? They had lived for so many years, and had explored many secret domains and places of inheritance, but they had never encountered such a thing. Interesting. A peerless expert curled the corner of his mouth and smiled. It is indeed a little interesting. The sky ancient sacred emperor knows how to play. Of course, my master loved to play when he was alive. This is the rule he set. The sacred spirit smiled. The one who fights to the end will obtain my master's inheritance. Now, the sacred hall's door is open for you. Enter the sacred hall, and see who is the fated one with my master, and who will obtain my master's inheritance. The sacred spirit's words were full of provocation, making everyone's blood boil uncontrollably. With a boom, the doors of the sacred hall, as lofty as an ancient mountain, opened. In that instant all 100 people were shocked, and they all looked at the open doors. More than 10 peerless experts wouldn't be modest at all. The more they reached this level, the more they understood that they had to fight when they needed to. If they played with grace, they might lose the opportunity. This was a lesson that many of them had learned. Although their primordial spirit and cultivation were suppressed, as peerless experts, they still possessed means that saints couldn't compare to. In an instant they burst forth with astonishing speed, and instantly overtook the crowd, taking the lead again. In the blink of an eye, more than 10 peerless experts rushed into the sacred hall with different postures. After 2 or 3 breaths, the others also rushed into the sacred hall. When the last person entered the sacred hall's door closed once again. Those who entered the sacred hall quickly discovered that the others had disappeared, and only they were left. Immediately their eyes lit up, and they found themselves in a spacious room. One of the walls was transparent, and they could see the scene outside. It was a circular platform. Looking forward, they could see the other transparent walls behind the platform, as well as the people behind the walls. If their eyes could jump out of their respective rooms, they would find that each of them was in a room. There were a total of 100 rooms, and they formed a circle. In the center was a huge circular platform. Fortunately, although each room was spacious, it was big enough, and it didn't make people feel oppressed or restrained. Everyone, welcome to the sacred hall. Master's game is about to begin. The sacred spirit's voice sounded in the air, and into everyone's ears. Now, I will choose 2 of you at random to be your opponents. Then, which 2 will you choose? Although the sacred spirit's voice was vigorous, it gave people a childish feeling. Let's use the big wheel to decide. After that, a huge wheel appeared on the circular platform. On the wheel, there were 100 areas, and there were numbers from 1 to 100. 2 red needles pointed in different directions. Immediately, as if 2 invisible fingers were using force to move the 2 needles, the 2 red needles spun quickly, dazzling and difficult to distinguish. After a dozen breaths, the speed of the red needles slowed down rapidly. Finally, the 2 needles stopped. One of them pointed to 18, and the other pointed to 36. Number 18 and number 36, congratulations, the Holy Spirit said. Shortly after, the transparent walls of room 18 and room 36 disappeared. The 2 quickly walked out of their rooms, and with a leap, they arrived on the circular platform. These 2 people were both at the peak of the 3-star saint level. They should be at the level where their cultivation was suppressed. If they fought at the same level, it was unknown who would win and who would lose. Number 18 pulled out her sword. It was a heaven-piercing saint sword, and it wasn't easy to get a spiritual sword. Number 36 didn't take out any weapon, but he wore a ring inlaid with a fiery red gem on his finger, and it emitted a scorching aura. Number 18 attacked first, and a huge crescent-shaped sword chi slashed out. It was as if she wanted to cut the platform in half like a cake, and attacked number 36. Number 36 took a step diagonally, and narrowly avoided the huge sword chi. He stretched out his right hand with the ring, and his 5 fingers bent. His palm caved in, and a touch of red appeared in his palm. Chapter 1640. Intense flames shot out with shocking might. Number 18 and number 36 fought fiercely. Chu Mu and the others realized that no matter how they attacked, their auras didn't surpass the peak of the 3-star saint realm. Could it be that they were deliberately limiting their offensive power? That shouldn't be possible. Only a fool would deliberately limit their offensive power in such a battle. If so, why was their offensive power limited to the peak of the 3-star saint realm? Soon, everyone had an answer. They were limited by the sky ancient sacred hall. Not only were their primordial spirits limited to the peak of the third level, but their cultivation base was also limited to the peak of the third level. Even their offensive power was limited to the peak of the 3-star saint realm. One had to know that although some people's cultivation base wasn't high, they had shocking battle prowess. They could easily defeat those stronger than them. True monstrous geniuses were like that. For example, Chu-Mu was only at the early second heavenly layer of the 3-star saint. In other words, the restrictions on his primordial spirit and cultivation base didn't affect Chu-Mu's strength too much. He could fight those stronger than him. Another example was the peerless expert. Each of them had a profound cultivation base, far surpassing the others. Their battle experience was incomparably rich, and their life and death experiences were many times more than the others. The same amount of strength in the hands of others might be 1 or 2 times of strength, but in their hands it could reach 30 or even 50 times of strength. Therefore, even if their cultivation base was limited to the peak of the third level of the 3-star saint realm, they could still display strength that surpassed their cultivation base. It wasn't difficult for them to reach the peak of the 5-star saint realm. However, the current situation was completely out of everyone's expectations. Even the greatest power had been restricted to the peak of the 3-star martial saint level. This meant that everyone's ability to fight above their level had been restricted. They couldn't unleash their power and became like the others, losing an advantage. This discovery caused the faces of the peerless experts to darken. They originally thought that they could sweep through the others, but it seemed like their hopes were dashed. In a battle with the same cultivation base and the same power, if they wanted to win, they could only rely on their own battle technique. There were many aspects to battle technique. Pure technique, the grasp of timing, the control of rhythm, and so on. This required talent and sufficient experience. Facing the same level of power, number 18 and number 36 unleashed all of their abilities and techniques in an attempt to defeat each other. After watching for a while, Chu-Mu knew that there wasn't much to see. The skills of these two people were at an average level, and it was difficult to determine the winner. It was estimated that the battle would last for quite a long time. Holy Spirit. Chu-Mu tried to speak. He didn't know if the Holy Spirit would respond to him. So, it's you, lucky kid. What business do you have with me? The Holy Spirit's voice rang out. Previously, you said that I was the first to pass through Heaven's moat and received an additional chance at the lottery, right? Chu-Mu asked. That's right. Do you want to draw a prize now? The Holy Spirit asked Chu-Mu. Yes, Chu-Mu said. As soon as his voice fell, a round plate as tall as a person appeared in front of him. The round plate was divided into 99 fan-shaped regions. Each region was different in size. 9 of them were blank, and the other 99 had different patterns on them. Some were in the shape of flowers, some were in the shape of pills, some were in the shape of stones, some were in the shape of white jade, and so on. A golden pointer pointed straight up, just motionless between 2 regions. As you can see, the 99 regions represent 99 possibilities. The Holy Spirit said, 9 blank regions represent that there are no treasures. If your luck isn't good enough, it's very likely that you won't get anything. In addition, there are treasures in the 99 regions, but the value of the treasures is different. The bigger the region, the lower the value of the treasures. On the contrary, the smaller the region, the higher the value of the treasures. Of course, the treasures collected by my master are all very valuable. Now turn that pointer, young man, the Holy Spirit said at last. Chu-Mu nodded, stretched out a finger, and put it on the golden pointer. With a strong push, the golden pointer started to spin quickly. Chu-Mu tried to release his spiritual power to control the golden pointer, intending to make the golden pointer stop in the smallest fan-shaped region. After all, the treasures in the smallest region were the most precious. Although he didn't know what it was, at least it was good. Young man, don't do useless work. This is not something you can control. The Holy Spirit's voice carried a bit of banter. Sure enough, Chu Mu felt that his spiritual power was like a stone sinking into the sea. It had no effect. It seemed that he could only rely on luck. The golden pointer kept spinning, and its speed was getting slower and slower. He could already see the pointer's movement. After more than 10 breaths, the golden pointer almost stopped. At this time, the golden pointer was moving to a blank region. A blank region meant that there were no treasures. If it stopped here, it meant that Chu Mu had gained nothing this time. Fortunately, the golden pointer didn't stop, but slowly moved to the next region. This region was the smallest region in the entire wheel. Chu Mu's heart suddenly became excited, full of expectations. It would be best if the pointer stopped in the smallest region, and he could get the most precious treasure. The golden pointer didn't stop, and moved at a turtle's speed to the next region. The next region wasn't the largest region, nor was it the smallest region. It was a medium region. The golden pointer stopped when it was near the edge of this region. Good luck, you got a treasure. The Holy Spirit smiled. Immediately, the stone-like treasure in the region that the pointer was pointing at flew out from the wheel, towards Chu Mu. Chu Mu reached out his hand and grabbed it. This was an oval-shaped silver stone. It was as smooth and round as a gemstone and emitted a weak energy fluctuation. Chu Mu was very familiar with this energy fluctuation. It belonged to spatial energy fluctuations. What kind of treasure is this? Chu Mu was puzzled. Void Escape Stone, it has the power of space. It can be activated with the power of the spirit. After it is activated, it will take you away from your original place, and randomly appear 10,000 miles away. The Holy Spirit explained to Chu Mu, this is an excellent treasure for escaping. Even if your opponent is a peerless master, you can still escape. However, it can only be used once. It could even escape from a peerless master. Chu Mu was surprised. This Void Escape Stone was indeed a very good treasure, an excellent life-saving treasure. With a thought, the Void Escape Stone was put away into the small space that he carried with him. Well, you have used your chance to draw the lottery. Next time, if you want to draw the lottery, you have to defeat others and get 10 points. The Holy Spirit's voice became silent. At this time, the battle between number 18 and number 36 hadn't ended yet, but it had already reached its climax. Both sides used their best technique. Perhaps it was good, but in Chu Mu's eyes, it was still not enough. After a few dozen breaths of time, number 36 showed a very hidden flaw, which number 18 grasped. Then, he closed in on number 18 and stretched out his right hand at close range, blasting out a flame attack. Number 18 was directly hit by the flame attack and was sent flying. Half of her body was charred black. Clearly, she had suffered heavy injuries. I admit defeat, number 18 said with difficulty. The moment he admitted defeat, his entire body was wrapped up by a power. He was transported through time and space, disappearing before everyone's eyes. He was sent out of the sacred hall. Congratulations, number 36, you have obtained 1 point. Now you have 2 points. Go back and wait for the next battle, the Holy Spirit said. Number 36 breathed a sigh of relief and turned to return to his room. That battle had consumed a lot of energy, so he quickly recovered. The wheel appeared again, and the 2 red needles spun quickly, choosing a new opponent. Not long after, the red needles stopped, and the opponent was chosen. Number 3 against number 75. Number 3 was one of the dozen or so peerless powerhouses, and it was the ferocious Zheng Li. Number 75 was previously a high-level saint-level powerhouse. Under normal circumstances, even a 9-star saint-level powerhouse would not be able to fight against a peerless powerhouse. The difference between the two was too great. However, the situation now was different. Their cultivation was restricted, and their highest attack power was also restricted. They were at the same level. Perhaps a peerless powerhouse would have more battle experience. After all, they had lived longer and experienced more. However, this did not mean that he had no resistance at all. Perhaps he could even defeat a peerless powerhouse. Even if it was a peerless expert whose cultivation and strength were restricted, he was still a peerless expert. Defeating his opponent could satisfy his soul and strengthen his confidence. It would be helpful for him to break through to a higher realm in the future. If you admit defeat now, you can live. Zhengli revealed a ferocious smile and said with murderous intent. Number 75's expression changed, and he hesitated for a moment. Then, his hesitation was replaced by determination. I don't believe that you can still kill me right now, Number 75 said softly. Zhengli smiled disdainfully. Without saying anything else, he directly launched an attack. With a flash, he was like an eagle swooping down on its prey. His trajectory seemed straight, but it was filled with profound mysteries. It was impossible to predict his trajectory and where he would land. As expected of a peerless expert, even if his primordial spirit was restricted, his cultivation was restricted, and his strength was restricted, he still displayed abilities that far surpassed others. It was fine if he didn't attack, but once he attacked, it was shocking. Chu Mu also narrowed his eyes and carefully stared at Zhengli's figure, his thoughts rapidly turning. Chapter 1641. There was a tearing sound, as if a piece of cloth had been forcefully torn apart. Under everyone's gaze, Zhengli seemed to have turned into an extremely ferocious goshawk. His hands had also turned into ferocious and sharp talons, clawing out continuously. With the same amount of power, Zhengli's technique was extremely exquisite. As soon as he launched an attack, his opponent could not fight back at all. He could only retreat and defend, but it was all in vain. In just one exchange, Zhengli's talons broke through his defense. Following a unique trajectory, there was no way for him to dodge. He was continuously struck by the talons, bleeding profusely. In the end, Zhengli's talons grabbed his opponent's shoulders and gripped tightly. Even the bones were pierced by his talons. Under the force of his arms, his opponent was torn apart. Blood flowed everywhere, and his organs splattered everywhere. It was extremely bloody. An ant is an ant. Zhengli snorted disdainfully. He shook off the blood on his hands. His ferocious gaze swept past everyone, making them shudder. Congratulations, number 3. You've received 1 point, the Holy Spirit said. His tone did not change at all because of Zhengli's ferocious tearing of his opponent. Chu Mu thought. He was still replaying Zhengli's every move in his mind. Every movement of his, be it his figure or his attack, could be described with one word: direct. It was not flashy, nor was it subtle. It was very direct and very sharp. There were no superfluous movements. It was all for the sake of killing the target in a better and more efficient manner. As expected of a supreme expert, he had experienced countless battles of life and death. Only after walking out of countless battles of life and death did he know how to best exert his strength in battle, even if his cultivation and power were restricted. Returning to one's natural state, removing the impurities and preserving the essence. Zhengli's style was direct, sharp, and ferocious. Chu Mu analyzed it carefully. He knew that Zhengli's every attack was not done casually. There was a purpose to it. If his cultivation and power weren't restricted, he wouldn't need to do this at all. He could kill his opponent with a casual blow. However, with his cultivation and power restricted, it was impossible for him to tear apart the body of a high-level martial saint expert. Therefore, he launched a series of attacks first. The landing point of each attack was so that he could better tear his opponent's body apart at the end. In other words, Zhengli had the intention of tearing his opponent apart from the very beginning. Therefore, his eagle claw attacks were aimed at destroying his opponent's body in order to complete the final blow. After understanding this, he had a better understanding of Zhengli's ruthlessness. In the first battle, half of number 18's body was charred black. She looked very miserable, but her injuries were not serious and she would recover soon. But in the second battle, number 75 was really very miserable. First, he was abused, then his body was torn apart. Even his primordial spirit did not escape and was directly torn apart by Zhengli in the process of tearing his body. Peerless experts indeed had such means. The tragic state of number 75 caused many people to feel distressed, and it had more or less affected them. However, as the third battle began, everyone adjusted their moods and continued to watch the battles. This was a good opportunity to watch others fight, especially when their power was restricted. They were basically fighting with their skills and experience. It was easier to broaden their horizons and deepen their understanding of the application of power. The two sides of the third battle were similar in strength. It was basically the same as the first battle. It was another intense battle. Battle after battle continued. When someone encountered a peerless expert, they immediately thought of number 75's miserable state. Most of them directly admitted defeat. There was nothing they could do. They could only sigh at their bad luck. Chu Mu was number 63. He just happened to be chosen for this battle. As the person with the lowest cultivation out of the 100, he just happened to be the first person to cross the 100,000-meter-long chasm. Everyone could not help but look at him in a different light. However, as Chu Mu's opponent, number 16, who was originally a high-level martial saint expert, did not think that Chu Mu would be a match for him. The others also thought so. It should be known that almost everyone's cultivation and power were restricted. They were at the pinnacle of the 3-star martial saint level. What they competed with was skills and experience. Chu Mu's power was only at the beginner level of the 2-star martial saint level. Not to mention skills and so on, just in terms of power alone, the others were much stronger than him. He could completely suppress them. Even in terms of experience, everyone present was probably above him. Therefore, by inference, Chu Mu was the weakest out of the 100. Picking him as an opponent was equivalent to gaining some points for free. Junior, admit defeat yourself, Chu Mu's opponent, number 16, said to Chu Mu very directly. You may not be a match for me, Chu Mu said. He was telling the truth, but to others it sounded like he was boasting. This junior is a little interesting, a peerless expert said with a smile. He's just a boastful person, another peerless expert said disdainfully. All right, then let me see how you're going to defeat me. When Chu Mu's opponent heard his words, he was so angry that he laughed. He was very unhappy that a junior at the beginner level of the 2-star martial saint level said such things. You'll know very soon, Chu Mu said. He stretched out his hand and grasped the void. Under the spreading flames, the blazing brilliance spiritual sword appeared in his hand. Spiritual sword. His opponent's eyes lit up. He immediately said, although the spiritual sword is very good, you still need to have sufficient strength to be able to unleash the power of the spiritual sword. Chu Mu did not answer. He had never been good at arguing. Chu Mu got into a fighting stance and drew his sword. Sword light streaked across the sky like a meteor and attacked his opponent. Originally, Chu Mu's sword could be faster, but it was also limited. It was only at the standard of a peak 3-star martial saint. However, he was only at the beginner level of the 2-star martial saint level, but his sword speed had reached the peak of the 3-star martial saint level. This was indeed surprising, but not too shocking. After all, he was the first person to pass through the 100,000-meter heavenly chasm. How could it be possible if he did not have some outstanding ability? Is this what you're relying on? Number 16 snorted coldly. He raised his palm and lightly struck out. The seemingly weak palm strike contained the power of wind and thunder. Its power was astonishing. With a flick of his wrist, the sword light twisted and turned like starlight jumping. It avoided the opponent's palm strike and instantly arrived in front of him. Number 16's reaction was extremely fast. As a high-level martial saint expert, he had countless battle experience and outstanding skills. His body swayed like a pendulum and avoided Chu Mu's sword light. He continuously struck out with both hands. His palms were like knives. Green wind blades with golden edges appeared to be incomparably sharp. All of them blasted towards Chu Mu. As number 16 attacked, he moved at high speed and distanced himself from Chu Mu. He formed hand seals and cast spells to attack from all directions. He was an expert who specialized in spells. He also knew how to use his spells to battle. He maintained a certain distance from his opponent so that he could better unleash his spells. Chu Mu's sword shattered the wind blades one after another. His figure moved around, evading the barrage of spells one after another as he closed in on his opponent. Battle ability was related to one's battle talent and battle experience. Chu Mu did not lack battle experience. He had experienced many battles, big and small. His battle talent was even more outstanding. The trajectory of his movements was difficult to predict. This junior's battle skills are very good, a peerless expert said. To be praised by a peerless expert meant that Chu Mu's battle skills were indeed very elementary. It's just that his strength is a little low. If he has the strength of a 3-star martial saint, he should be able to defeat his opponent. The moment this peerless expert made such a judgment, the battle on the platform changed. Chu Mu closed in on his opponent and displayed extremely pure sword technique. Under layers of overlapping sword light, his opponent could not pull away at all. It felt like a fish that had fallen into a net. No matter how hard he tried, he could not break out of the net's shackles. Chu Mu was best at close combat. He was also very powerful. In a situation where his strength was restricted to the same level, it was a battle of skills. His skills were very astonishing. Before he could cast his spell, it was broken by Chu Mu's sword. The difference began to show. Some of the techniques of a high-level martial saint expert could only be displayed with sufficient cultivation. In a situation where one's cultivation and strength were restricted, there were some techniques that could not be displayed at all. On the other hand, Chu Mu was different. His original cultivation was like this. The display of his strength was related to his cultivation. He was not restricted in any way and could display it to his heart's content. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. 3 sword light in a row stabbed in different directions at the same time. Number 16 tried his best to dodge, but only managed to avoid 2 of them. He was hit by the 3rd and was immediately injured. Chu Mu's attacks were endless. Sword light was like a long river, flowing endlessly. Number 16 had no way to counterattack. He was injured again as he struggled to defend. I admit defeat. Unable to counterattack and continuously injured, number 16 was shocked and hurriedly shouted, I admit defeat. As soon as he admitted defeat, Chu Mu withdrew his sword and stopped attacking. Then, right before Chu Mu's eyes, number 16's figure quickly faded and disappeared. Congratulations, number 63. You've defeated your opponent and received 1 point. Now you have 2 points, the sacred spirit said. Chu Mu returned to his room and rested. In the battle just now, he did not use up much of his strength. In a situation where his strength was restricted, he only needed to display the strength of a 1-star martial saint to reach the peak of the 3-star martial saint level. He actually won. This junior cannot be underestimated. Interesting. This person is actually a monster. Zheng Li's eyes flashed with a fierce light as they fell on Chu Mu. In my life, I've killed geniuses of all levels, but I've never killed a monster. I wonder how it feels to kill one? Chu Mu felt a chill run down his spine. He followed Zheng Li's gaze and immediately met Zheng Li's fierce gaze. Chapter 1642. Zheng Li's ferocious gaze was like a sharp sword, piercing into Chu Mu's eyes. It was as if he wanted to pierce through Chu Mu. Chu Mu wasn't afraid at all. He didn't care at all. Zheng Li grinned. His gloomy smile made it seem as if he was staring at his prey. It made people shudder. He immediately retracted his gaze. Chu Mu understood that Zheng Li's meaning was very clear. If they met again, Zhengli would definitely treat him well. But he wasn't afraid. In a situation where his cultivation and strength were restricted, what mattered was combat skills. In this aspect, Chu Mu was quite confident. Even if his opponent was a peerless expert with superb combat skills, he might not necessarily be unable to resist. Chu Mu didn't feel any joy at winning the first battle. This was something he should do. If he couldn't defeat his opponent, it would only mean that he was too weak. 100 people, each with 1 point. That's a total of 100 points. I need 10 points to be able to draw a lottery. Moreover, the points will be used up every time I draw a lottery. I have to keep the points I have. In other words, in addition to my original points, I need 10 more points to be able to draw a lottery. Chu Mu silently calculated. Looking at it this way, there are only 9 people who can draw the lottery, or have the chance to draw the lottery. I've gotten an extra lottery chance. That's not bad. At this moment, Chu Mu had 2 points. One of them belonged to him and couldn't be used. He still needed 9 more points to be able to draw a lottery. The battles continued one after another. Those who couldn't win would immediately admit defeat at the crucial moment. If they met a peerless expert, they would usually admit defeat directly, not giving the peerless expert a chance to make a move. So up to this point, other than Zhengli, the other peerless experts didn't have a chance to make a move. However, they didn't care. They were just a bunch of ants. Whether they made a move or not didn't matter. Soon, the first round was over. 50 people won and 50 lost. Among the 50 people who lost, 10 of them died. Among the 30 people who lost, 10 of them were unscathed because they had met a peerless expert and directly admitted defeat. The rest of the people were more or less injured. Perhaps it was the arrangement of the Holy Spirit, but in the first round, no one fought twice. Moreover, the dozen or so peerless powerhouses did not meet each other. The 50 people who won would each have 2 points. If they were defeated, all the points would belong to the winner. In the first round, Yang Fan's opponent was a mid-level martial saint. Yang Fan displayed his exquisite swordsmanship and used nearly 15 minutes to defeat his opponent. With almost no time to rest, the second round began, and the wheel began to spin again. To everyone's surprise, the 2 sides of the first battle were 2 of the dozen or so peerless experts. A battle between 2 peerless experts. What they were competing on was not the strength of their strength, but the level of their skills. Everyone's eyes widened, and Chu Mu was no exception. He felt that sooner or later, he would have to face a peerless expert. It was better to be prepared than to have a better understanding of their techniques and method. Of the 2 peerless experts, one used a short sword, and the other did not use a sword. Instead, he wore ferocious gloves. The 2 of them did not say anything and immediately attacked. With the short sword in hand, they displayed their exquisite swordsmanship to their heart's content. Sword light was endless, like the water of a long river flowing endlessly, like the light of a bright moon shining in the sky, or like the endless darkness, strange and unpredictable. With one sword in hand, so many attacks were performed. The powerful techniques were astonishing, and everyone was dumbfounded. There was a layer of golden light on the sword. That was the power of gold. This person was not a sword saint, but his swordsmanship was not inferior to some sword saints. Furthermore, he used his left hand to support him. As his 5 fingers wriggled, his fingers continuously shot out powerful finger forces, shooting at his opponent from different angles. It coordinated with the attack of the short sword in his right hand, complementing each other. This move made many people break out in cold sweat. They imagined that if they were the opponent, they would not be able to dodge or defend against such attacks, let alone counterattack. They would be killed in a few moves. The battle techniques of the peerless experts were indeed terrifying. They could not find any flaws at all. Chu Mu narrowed his eyes and watched carefully. He did not miss a single detail. Under his powerful sword of sight and sword of will, he could see the trajectory of every attack and attack of the peerless expert. If the battle techniques of the peerless expert with the short sword could be described as unpredictable and perfect, then the battle techniques of the other expert with the gloves could be described as fierce and domineering. No matter how nimble the opponent's swordsmanship and fingers were, how unpredictable and how perfectly they coordinated, he was not affected at all. He clenched his fists and threw out punch after punch. Every punch was bound to cause the sound of wind and thunder to surge. The power of the fist was tyrannical, and the momentum of the fist was vast. Every punch was bound to block, destroy, and counterattack the opponent's attack. Every punch was yellow in color, like a phantom of a mountain, and also like a punch that could shatter a mountain. The expert with the gloves stood still like a mountain. His hands were ferocious, attacking and defending as one. Every move was tyrannical and domineering. The peerless expert wielding a short sword moved nimbly, circling around the opponent, attacking from all directions, from all angles. The battle between the two sides was very exciting and intense. No matter what kind of combat skills the two sides displayed, they all had the same characteristic, and that was practicality. There wasn't the slightest bit of fanciness, and there wasn't the slightest bit of flashiness. Every move and style, whether direct or not, had only one goal, and that was to kill the other. The peerless experts had already touched the true essence of battle technique. There was no need for too much strength, too strong attack, too fast speed, or too nimble. It only needed to be suitable. Facing the kind of enemy, facing the kind of time, facing the kind of angle, adjusting one's own movement speed, attack speed, reaction speed, and so on to achieve the best effect. As he watched, Chu Mu suddenly came to such an understanding. In that moment, he felt his cultivation level loosen. He had been enlightened in his battle techniques, and had clearly improved. Peerless experts are truly peerless experts. Even with their strength suppressed, they're still so shocking. Just by watching them fight, I've come to such an understanding. Chu Mu thought. Even if he did not gain anything else from the sacred hall, just this understanding alone was enough for him to study for a period of time. Of course, Chu Mu would continue fighting. At the very least, he had to fight against a peerless expert personally to get the best effect of tempering himself. The battle between the two peerless experts lasted for over an hour, but there was still no clear victor. Even though the strength of both sides had been suppressed, they had reached an extremely profound level in the application of their strength. As a result, the battle that lasted for over an hour did not consume too much of their strength. If the situation continued, it would be very difficult for the two of them to determine a victor. No one knew how long the battle would last, so it gave everyone enough time to rest and observe. They would be able to better comprehend and improve themselves as much as possible. Another hour passed, and the battle was still going on. It was extremely intense. Stop! Suddenly, the Holy Spirit's voice rang out. A vast and irresistible force pressed down, directly pushing the two of them apart. According to your current situation, even if you fight for a few more days, it'll be difficult to determine a victor. The Holy Spirit said, I don't want to wait that long, so I'll change the rules. In a battle between peerless experts, as long as you can hit your opponent once, you'll win. If you hit your opponent at the same time, you'll win based on injuries. No one had any objections to the Holy Spirit's decision. Even if they did, it would be useless because the Holy Spirit had already made a decision and would not change it. All right, you can continue fighting now, said the Holy Spirit, withdrawing its power. The two peerless experts woke up from their shock. Their eyes changed, becoming extremely sharp. In the previous battle, although they were constantly defending and attacking, it was still somewhat conservative. Now, the new rules had been changed. They only needed to hit their opponent's location first, or cause more injuries to their opponent to win. Since that was the case, they were thinking of a better way to defeat their opponent. In the following battle, the fighting style of both sides changed. The expert with the gloves completely gave up on defense, and changed to pure offense. His attacks were extremely violent and overbearing. His fists were like dragons coming out of the water, like Vajra breaking mountains. It was different from the previous battle. Each of his fists gave people a terrifying feeling, as if they would be crushed under the power of his fists and turned into powder. The peerless expert with the short sword also changed his fighting style. There were fewer variations, and he became more direct and sharper. His finger technique was even more astonishing. Tyrannical finger power was continuously shot out, piercing through the void. Vajra breaking mountains. The expert with the gauntlets let out a furious roar as he punched out with both fists, resonating with the roar. His momentum reached its peak, causing the entire area to tremble. In an instant, a huge figure seemed to rise up from his body, waving its huge fist. With a single punch, a mountain in front of him was smashed into pieces, and then into dust. The peerless expert with the short sword looked dignified. He took a deep breath, and his 5 fingers changed rapidly, condensing into a single finger. Suddenly, a huge finger seemed to leap out of the void, pointing at his opponent. Then, the short sword flew out of his hand, drawing an arc in the air, and appeared behind the expert with the gloves. It rotated at high speed, like a huge drill, carrying an incomparably terrifying penetrating force, bombarding down. The 2 peerless experts both used their killing moves to determine the winner.